Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto is dead instead of Minato during the Kyuubi attack part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Awareness was the first to return, like needles under the skin, sharp and terrifying. Fuzzy shapes whirled before his eyes, indistinct, and he could not make out what they were supposed to be. Sounds haunted him, and his hands felt numb, useless. Attempts to vocalize just led to barely audible murmurs. A spike of fear lanced down his spine then. He might not be alone out here. The sound of moving water reached his ears, after a long while. A stream, perhaps. Slowly he managed to drag his arm to the side, as brownish locks obscuring blue eyes fell away. He hacked and coughed harshly, his hands digging into the dirt. He briefly considered that he had never felt this awful before, and then shoved himself onto his back. The sky was a dull blue, though he closed his eyes almost immediately, and saw no more of it. He woke up again much later, when it was evening, perhaps on another day. His head pounded as if he had drunk a dozen bottles of sake. His arms still refused to work properly, though he managed to prop himself up awkwardly, his muscles protesting against the stress. A Hittite had fallen off his forehead. He was not sure what it meant. There was something wooden at the far end of the clearing, something man-made, but that observation fled again when he became unconscious once again. It was morning now. He wasn't quite sure if it was only the next day, or if more had passed. His headache had finally lessened, though he remained only intermittently lucid and capable of considering such things. Determining his location was difficult, though the conclusion that it was not where he should be was immediate and obvious to him. He chided himself over that observation. He should figure out where he was, not where he was not. The blonde took a good look at the forehead protector. It bore the symbol of a leaf, Kanahigakure. He remembered that place now. It was where he lived. Pondering what the odds were of a nin passing nearby to take him home, he distractedly ran his hand across the metal. A sense of unease crept up on him, of wrongness. He managed to finally stumble to his feet an hour or two later, his legs shaky. A small bush was nearby, bearing bright red berries, and he dragged himself over step by step, gorging on them as if starving. The sound of water, it turned out, came from a stream through the little valley he occupied. He almost fell into the stream. That was stupid. He dragged himself back to the clearing he woke up in, focusing on regaining his bearings, on determining what he should do next. His limbs behaved better now, though his eyes remained painfully poor, refusing to focus properly. As far as he could ascertain, he had been wearing a vest and coat, though they were thoroughly rotten. At least he wasn't naked. 6 kunai, short ninja knives, hung loosely on his belt, ready for use. He doubted he could hit a barn right now, but it was something. Quite suddenly, he realized he could not sense his chakra. It took hours more for his head to finally clear up a little. His mind was no longer quite so fuzzy, though strange ideas kept running through his head in a way they really shouldn't. He was not quite sure of who he was, even now, as memories were slow in coming, and the feelings that they induced were not very pleasant. He carefully bandaged his wounded feet, since he managed to tear them up pretty bad during the time he dragged himself along with his bare hands, having long since lost his sandals. The makeshift pads of leaves bound to the soles of his feet should be sufficient to keep the worst of the dirt out for now, though visiting a medical nin as soon as possible was probably a clever idea. Perhaps he could visit Tsunade? It took a few minutes to realize that he had no idea who Tsunade was. Bits and pieces of memory were returning along with coordination, and when he threw a few kunai, he got pretty close to his target, even considering his awful eyesight. That, too, seemed to be improving, as the world was showing more colors than bleak yellow, red and off-blue. Pain. He hadn't noticed it before, but he hurt all over and deeply. Bones felt like they were made of knives, and they kept cutting into him. The blonde doubted any of his stumbling was responsible. It was like he had not used his muscles in months. He guessed idly that it might be his pain receptors reconnecting, which would imply he probably took quite the nasty hit to the brain. That would explain the memory loss as well. He tried to concentrate on breathing steadily as the sharp knives in his joints were slowly replaced by pins and needles. The next time he woke up, the pain was gone. There was vague strain in his extremities, but a few experimental punches seemed to cause no excruciating sensation any longer. His hair was constantly hanging in his face. Annoying, so he bound his Hittite back onto his forehead to keep it out of the way. He tossed away his cloak, since it was ripped to ribbons and far too flashy in case he was in enemy territory. The man suppressed a shudder at the thought of being stuck, sick and confused, in the middle of the land of earth, Iwagakure. The very word sent a shiver down his back, as it called forth visions of blank-faced warriors wielding earth jutsu with expertise, their leaders soaring high above, defying gravity itself. A wave of melancholy made its way through the amnesiac, though he didn't know why. He lingered on the question, but no answer came to him. Just a deep resignation. It was that afternoon that the blonde decided to leave his safe haven. Having stripped his berry bush of most of its fruit, and what remained looking far from edible, he needed to find a new source of food anyway. He took a quick bath and rinsed out his clothes, and with a long sigh he set out on feet that still required more guidance than they should. He dared not risk taking to the trees, and there were not enough here to make any speed. As he walked, he realized the landscape was painfully familiar, and he quickly decided that wherever he was exactly, he was on friendly soil. The land of fire, no doubt about it, which was a relief. Now he had to figure out which part of it he was in, of course. His brain refused to recall a map of the region, though he distinctly remembered Konoha being fairly central. Of course, that told him nothing, so he continued to wander, grabbing anything edible he could to sustain himself. Pained muscles slowly got used to moving again, though they were far from restored just yet. A town loomed in the distance, at long last. He could tell by the sun that he was going southwards, so if he could deduce which town this was, perhaps he could use that to identify which direction to go for Konoha. His hair once again fell in his face, since his Hitai's band was badly worn and kept loosening, even with multiple knots. He gathered his hair together in an untidy mess and bound it together with a strip from his pant leg, the thick mud that refused to come out even after multiple baths staining it a strange brown. He felt bad about not showing his village symbol any longer, but at least he could keep it on him, in case he needed it. He was finally starting to feel himself again, whoever that was, and he smiled congenially at the people passing. A few of them gave him a peculiar look, though nobody stopped him. Many hotels and entertainment venues passed by as he crossed the streets of this town, or city, and it didn't take him long to catch its name. Otafukagai. The name sparked a memory or two, though he was not quite sure whether he'd ever been here before for any length of time, or had just read about it. He did, at least, remember quite clearly that it was near Konoha on the map. He strode into the nearest shop, waving at the clerk. "Can I help you, sir?" the civilian asked, a happy smile plastered on his rather large head, a strange sombrero-like hat balancing on it. "I need directions. I've been wounded in the field and I need to get back to Konoha." He attempted to look embarrassed, which was not very difficult. "I seem to be a little lost." "Ah, you're a ninja, aren't you?" the civilian asked in surprise. The blonde shoved the clerk a few coins for a map, though the man seems confused by why a ninja would need one. His trip out of the town was as quick as his entrance, and he rapidly found himself back out in the uncharted regions of the land of fire that made up a good chunk of it, impossible to identify precisely because of few recognizable features. He kept the town of Otafukagai in sight, and finally deduced from the position of the sun which direction was towards Konoha. Then, he walked. His chakra returned after a day. It hummed under his skin, ready to be used. He didn't know how much he missed it until it surged back, as the blonde shinobi felt 10 times better already, much more healthy. He realized that he could not really have had no chakra, since he would have to have been dead if that were the case. He had to have simply been numb to it, his coils overloaded. He had lost control of his chakra sense, and essentially been a civilian, even though he had never considered that as a possibility. He could feel that his reserves were far from full, and they'd had some days to recover already, but without proper food and rest he probably wasn't helping matters. He resolved to concentrate on getting home first, before anything else. It was important. Reaching the outskirts of Konoha by nightfall, he whistled the walls in the distance, hidden behind a thick forest, beckoned him closer, and he could feel a certain nostalgia even from here. He smiled softly at the fitting name of the town, the village hidden by the leaves. It would be some distance yet before he would be able to make out the gate, or the Hokage monument. He was pretty sure that word signified the leader of the village. He had the sudden urge to call out that he'd be Hokage one day, though he was not entirely sure why. Childhood dreams? No matter, he felt filthy, even though he knew he had looked terribly since the start. He had not been able to wash since the stream, and walking through the forests around Konoha didn't help things, as twigs and dirt attached themselves wherever they could. His hair was matted and full of entirely too much dirt, and he kept sniffing uncomfortably, probably a cold. He had expected to arrive at the town the day before, but underestimated the distance, or he'd been walking in circles. Regardless, one of the gates finally came in sight, and apparently the blonde shinobi had missed out on quite a wide path leading to it. Just his luck. Despite all the grime on him, though, the man felt quite fit, no more vertigo, and no trouble manipulating his chakra. It came natural. 2 ninja were stationed at the gate, though neither seemed particularly interested in his approach, looking on with bored expressions. "What are you doing here, stranger?" one asked. The blonde man blinked as he stopped before them. "I am returning from a mission. I'm pretty sure things went wrong, and I'm still a bit fuzzy upstairs." He pulled out his hitai and showed it to them. "I could probably use a bath and a trip to the hospital." One of the shinobi took him by the shoulder and led him towards the town. Evidently he still came across as quite shell-shocked. The blonde didn't attempt to dissuade the man, as he was having enough trouble remembering where everything was. The familiar shapes of Konoha's buildings finally appeared before him, and he sighed contentedly in recognition. "Must have been away for a long time to have such a reaction," said his guide, a man wearing a bandage over his nose and smiling brightly. The blonde nodded distractedly in response, drinking in the familiar sights. There, in the distance, was the Yamanaka flower shop, wasn't it? Weren't the hot springs over on the side? Might he find Sensei peeking at the ladies there? He toyed with one of his kunai as he trounced after his guide, lobbed a few into the wall they passed, and quickly retrieved them. The guide didn't seem to mind. He flung a few high, and all but one returned. Darn, he only had 6 on him. He'd have to get new ones at the armory, if he could remember where those were. We're nearly at the hospital. You can check yourself in, can't you? Better make sure you check in with the Hokage too, don't want anyone thinking you're a spy. The guide smirked, and the blond man gave a meaningless smile back. Before he could do anything more, the guide had already jumped away across the nearest roof in the direction of the gates he'd left. The blonde froze in shock as his eyes caught a familiar sight. High above the village, clearly visible from here, was the majestic Hokage monument. It stretched out across the rock wall, giant stone faces with serious grimaces, holding vigil over their town with solemnity. Shodai Hokage Senju Hashirama. Naidame Hokage Senju Tobirama. Sandame Hokage Sarutobi Hiruzen. Yandame Hokage Namikaze Minato. Me, he remembered now. Namikaze Minato, that's my name. His eyes rolled up as he collapsed. A week earlier. This place makes me think about the mistakes I've made in the past, and I've made so many of them. I come here so very often, and yet I feel like it's not enough. Kakashi stared at the plaque. He'd long realized it was only a placeholder, really. In his mind's eye, in Obito's eye, he saw his old team, reunited. He mused here about what he should have done, about what he could have done. He was secretly relieved nobody was around to tell him he couldn't have done anything different. That really didn't help. The white-haired shinobi was aware that he couldn't fix the past, of course, all too aware. He thought of that mistake, and why he was in this place so often, to drag his finger across the name of his lost teammate, to think about how Obito gave up half the sight of the world to him. Kakashi wasn't sure how long he'd been there today. It didn't matter. He was probably late again. It didn't matter. For these brief periods that he spent here, staring at the honored dead, he felt like he wasn't so alone in this violent and unforgiving world. He was sure few could understand the sentiment. There were not many shinobi even in this town who have lost both their teacher and teammates so early, especially since it had been some time since there had been a major war. Minato-sensei, Obito, Rinchan. Each of their names was on this plaque, and others like it. Kakashi rubbed at his burning eyes, though tears would not fall. He finally turned away, shaking his head. It was about time to retrieve his new genin team. He'd failed every team so far as none had even gotten close to the kind of teamwork that even his team had when they first started, and that had been pretty abysmal. Kakashi was the odd one out then, a stickler for regulations and entirely too serious about everything. He supposed Obito at least taught him the error of those ways, in the end. He laughed slightly behind his cloth mask as he thought of which of Obito's many lame excuses he'd used today. So many choices. He distractedly pulled out one of Jiraiya's Ika books. He'd read them all, so he really didn't need to read it again, but it felt right and some of the lines were endlessly enjoyable. He chuckled slightly as he strode blindly towards the academy, taking in the calm and relaxed feeling of a village at peace. He walked by a bum passed out in the street, reeking as if he hadn't bathed in a week. There were a pair of kunoichi bickering a slight distance further, apparently over clothing. A nasty feral cat hissed from a side alley, its fur matted and a reddish ribbon hanging from its back. Business as usual in the Hidden Leaf village. Konoha, perhaps the last companion that had been there since his youth, that hadn't changed on him. Kakashi couldn't help but feel slightly humbled as he walked through the narrow streets, seeing so many people enjoying their lives, oblivious to the hardships that shinobi protected them from. The village was greater than him, and yet it relied on his help to remain as it was vibrant and alive. Arriving at the school he was scheduled to be at some hours ago, Kakashi heard something odd. He heard yelling. He immediately recognized the voice of Yukiko Sasuke, last survivor of the massacre. The last Uchiha, after a fashion. The Jonin carefully slid open the door, noting that only 2 people were present, Sasuke and a pink-haired kunoichi with tears in her eyes, who looked fearfully at her irate teammate. I don't know what you did, but we need the dead last back. Our sensei could be here at any moment. I know I did nothing, so who else could have done it? Ahem, Kakashi tried. The Uchiha deigned to glare at the new arrival briefly before he continued staring at the girl with malice. She had to be Harino Sakura, undoubtedly. The latter had turned to Kakashi, paling, her hands shaking wildly. As sensei? Hello, anyone listening? Kakashi tried a second time, finally attracting the attention of Sasuke, who had seemingly not realized his sensei's identity before. The silver-haired shinobi sighed deeply. This would be another fail, probably. Where was the last of the team? Where is your third teammate, Uzumaki Naruto? He's missing, Sakura said with a squeak. He was here one moment, then he wasn't. He was acting all strange, a bit sickly. Then it was like that speed technique that Jonin use. Kakashi frowned. He had heard something about little Naruto learning the Kage Bunshin technique. Perhaps a dispelled clone. Sasuke added, and Kakashi rolled my eye. Where was the last place you saw him? He was right here, Sakura said, pointing at a chair at the side of the classroom, which now only held a discarded Hittite. Naruto wasn't doing anything special. I think he was planning to prank you, actually, before he complained of feeling ill, and then from one moment to the next he was just gone. Just a little smoke, like Kawarini, but he didn't use any hand signs. I did nothing to the dead last, Sasuke said haughtily, his eyes ablaze with indignation. Haruno must have done something. I doubt any of you genin have the ability to make people vanish, Kakashi pointed out in exasperation. Well, if he disappeared from here, I'll go see if I can find him. You should remain here while I go to the Hokage to see if he has seen Naruto. Why would the Hokage know that? Sasuke asked, but didn't get an answer as Kakashi sped away. He made it most of the way out of the hallway before he heard what he had been expecting, a shrill scream in the distance. Hey! You're late. Merely lost on the road of life, Kakashi murmured to himself with a smile as he jumped across roofs towards the Hokage Tower. A knot formed in his stomach as ever worse possibilities fought for dominance over the obvious explanations. Naruto vanishing into thin air could mean many very bad things. He forced himself to ignore the eerie feeling of dread that was starting to settle on him without any clear reason and sped on, confident his new student had simply seen fit to skip his first day as a genin. The unlikelihood of that did nothing to settle his nerves. The Hokage Tower wasn't particularly busy. Kakashi sneaked a peek around the corner and noticed Sarutobi reading a very familiar book. The Jonin strode in without announcing himself. It was not really needed, as the so-called god of shinobi undoubtedly heard him coming from when he entered the tower, if not sooner. Kakashi? Can I help you? The Hokage asked carefully, acting apologetic about being caught reading Jiraiya-sama's excellent literature. Kakashi shrugged his shoulders, staring lazily. I am missing the loudest of my students, Sarutobi caught on immediately to be expected. Kakashi would not come here had he sensed the boy anywhere near, and Naruto was rather noticeable. The Hokage worriedly took out one of his precious tools, a glass ball used for spying on people in the village, when needed. Kakashi idly wondered if it could be used to look into the hot springs. He rubbed his headband, feeling the Sharingan eye beneath it twinge. It always did react to stress, so it was no wonder. On the other hand, perhaps Obito was warning him against his impure thoughts. Kakashi snorted at that concept. The Hokage was bent over the ball. Kakashi couldn't make out anything in it, but then he wasn't really trying to. If Sarutobi couldn't find Naruto using this tool, then nobody could. He began to sweat a little as the minutes ticked by, perspiration also appearing on Lord Hokage's forehead in beads. He noticed the faint glow of chakra from the old man's hands. For it to be visible in its base form, the professor must be using quite a lot of it. Finally, the Hokage slumped back in his chair. A chill ran down Kakashi's back at the lost look in his eyes. Kakashi, Sarutobi began, before hesitating. I couldn't find Naruto anywhere in Konoha. I pushed the orb to its limit as far as I could make it search. It reacts to any living thing. This shouldn't be possible. Uzumaki Naruto is no longer anywhere in the land of fire or a good distance around it. I'm afraid to say it, and I'll have to confirm it, but it's more likely that he is dead. Kakashi froze, his fears becoming reality, and the feeling of dread intensified. Even by his most generous calculations, Naruto couldn't have left more than a day or two ago, at most, if the one that had been in the classroom was merely a clone. To leave the land of fire entirely in that time was not possible for a rookie genin, any genin, really, and Naruto was known as the dead last for a reason. Which really only left one possibility. He almost sank through his knees. He'd lost Sensei's son. Sarutobi retrieved a scroll from his desk and spread it open. It was covered in a complex seal array, far more intricate than Kakashi had ever seen. This is one of Minato's designs. It was supposed to be handed to Naruto in due time, and it's linked to his chakra. Sarutobi frowned. If I can activate it, it would suggest that Naruto's chakra is still within its huge range. If it doesn't, the Hokage trickled a little chakra into the design, and it suddenly flickered brightly. After a few moments of shuddering light, it doused again. Nothing happened. The Hokage sighed and sat back in his chair, the life seemingly draining out of him. Kakashi didn't say anything for a while, and neither did Sarutobi. It wasn't necessary. They both knew that something like this couldn't be fixed with words, or at all. Oh, Kakashi was certain that the Hokage would send out a search party to find Naruto. He had an inkling about what they'd find, though Naruto's body, cold and dead, somewhere in or outside of Konoha. They knew the boy had recently found out about his burden, his curse. Perhaps the boy had decided to run. Kakashi couldn't really blame him, all things considered. Whatever Naruto had done, it had not been enough, evidently. He'd likely been found by a traitor, a foreign nin, perhaps even a missing nin, and the boy didn't stand a chance against such odds. I am recalling Jiraiya to the village, Sarutobi said in a subdued voice. If there is anyone who can track Minato's seal, it is he. Kyuubi would have not simply let Naruto die. The demon would have fought. We must know whether or not we are safe from the reemergence of the Kitsune. I'll send out messengers as soon as I have an idea where to send them. Kakashi wanted to curse at Sarutobi for focusing on the seal, but he knew the man was right. It was selfish to merely think of Sensei's offspring as such, and to ignore the dangerous role he'd been imparted with. As a Jinchuriki, Naruto carried the fate of one of the Biju. The death of the creature had to be confirmed, or they'd all have to get ready to fight another impossible battle. A battle that Minato-sensei had finished, last time, at great cost. Should we get Tsunade back as well? he asked, knowing the answer. Sarutobi shook his head, as expected. She has left the village of her own free will. Send Pakin to her, have him tell her what happened. If she chooses to return, she must do so willingly, not due to our persuasion. It would at the very least take Jiraiya's input, I believe. Kakashi quickly calmed Pakin. His friendly mean dog, he seemed quite put out with his master's harsh and commanding tone, ears drooping. He'd make it up to him later, Kakashi resolved. Sarutobi joined him as they left the tower. I will speak to the council, they must know the developments. None of the repercussions I can think of are good. If we have lost Naruto, perhaps it is the case that our greatest foe, the demon, has been revived. If Naruto has been taken, then we may have even greater problems. Sarutobi sighed deeply. I fear that this will be the end of Konoha's era of peace, Kakashi. Civilians will notice Naruto's missing quickly, even decoys will do little to stop that. Rumor will spread quickly to neighboring countries. Those kept at bay by the possible threat of a Kyuubi Jinchuriki will no longer be so constrained, since it's unlikely civilians will be quiet about it. Nations will find an excuse to restart the old feuds. Without the Uchiha clan as well, we are terribly weakened. Iwagakure, do you think? Kakashi suggested the nation had been a long-standing foe of most of the shinobi nations for ages. They probably try making trouble again. Sarutobi seemed to agree with that belief. We cannot stand against them now. We do not have the allies we would need, nor the elite soldiers to lead the fight, after such a long peace. I have you, but we both know that we will require more than the copy need to defeat IWA once more, should it come to that. It worries me that our genin of today may have to pick up our slack if it comes to that. I hope Naruto would be an adult before such a war would erupt, Kakashi admitted. To step in those great shoes, I believed he could do it. Sarutobi smiled thinly, tears close to the surface. He told me he would be Hokage one day every time I met him, really. He was so much like his father. We will have to find the one responsible, Kakashi vowed with furious anger in a shaky voice. If it is IWA, then not a stone will be left standing of their village when this is done. Even if I have to pull each one off by hand. Nothing will stand in the way of that promise. Sarutobi's eyes moistened further. The old Hokage laughed slightly, though. I fear that this new Nindo will clash with your habit of always being late, Kakashi. You might have to reconsider. Kakashi shrugged. I will find a way, Hokage-sama. I will find out what happened to Naruto, bring back his body, if that is how it is, and vanquish those who are responsible. Only then will I feel that the debt to my sensei has been fulfilled, if not entirely, at least in part. He left quickly, leaving the Hokage standing alone on the path from the tower, looking decidedly friendlier than usual. He would have to recruit Inoichi and Shikaku, they'd agree, Kakashi was certain. There were fewer greater minds in Konohagakure, and he was considered a genius himself. Together they had to be able to find the truth. Perhaps he could convince the Ino-Shikacho trio to reunite once more in the pursuit of whoever was responsible for this. First, though, he realized with a sigh, there was a two-man genin team he had to go fail. Minato Namikaze, former Yondaime Hokage, looked out over his village from atop his own stone head on the Hokage monument. The shinobi, dressed in a decrepit flak jacket and holding one of his Hiraition kunai in his hand, twirled the latter absently as he gazed over his old village and thought. He supposed he should consider himself lucky. He'd passed out right in front of the hospital, and nobody could be bothered to drag the poor, wounded, dirty Nin inside. Most likely his foul smell or awful hygiene had simply scared everyone away. The lucky consequence was that nobody had figured out his identity while he himself had forgotten it, and now the ex-Hokage could plan. Konohagakure had changed since he was last there. Minato had snatched up a recent paper along the way and noted that apparently something like a decade had flown by without his knowledge, passing by as if they'd never happened. He looked the same age as he remembered, but then, he could simply be aging gracefully, considering some of the older Nin he was aware of and their remarkably youthful visage. He briefly thought of Kushina. A sharp pain shot through his heart at the thought. Unfortunately, she was now forever beyond his grasp. They'd realized it was coming, of course, so it was something he could bear. Minato clasped his hand around the kunai, wincing slightly at its sharp edges cut into his skin. The worst part of the newspaper had been the cover story, the reason he'd picked up this particular paper in the first place. Minato knew he shouldn't have picked up civilian news, given its inevitable bias, but he hadn't quite expected this. The headline was on the disappearance and likely death of the Kyuubi, even if it didn't mention the creature by name. It became quickly apparent that they didn't mean the demon itself. The sealing had been effective, but its container, Naruto. His Naruto. No more tears would come, for now, he'd been unable to stop earlier, learning that little Naruto, whom the man had last seen as a mere baby, had seemingly joined Kushina beyond, while the only one who should have died, who actually actively chose it, for the sake of the village, had returned to the land of the living. The Shinigami was a cruel, cruel being. Minato knew that he should not be selfish. He knew he had lost Kushina, and would never be able to get to know Naruto. He had never even expected to be alive at all in this time, so even knowing what became of my family was more than he should have expected, and the shinobi life is a harsh life. He at least had pictures of his son, his own flesh and blood, as a young boy, ready to become a shinobi. It broke his heart to look at them. Most of them involved the tyke involved in some prank or another, seemingly unhurt by the glares of the civilians that shared the image. The civilians apparently didn't see the wondrous joy that was his son, describing him merely as a demon. Minato knew to expect that, but it seemed at least that Naruto had known more than pain, judging from what he had seen. Still, the pain cut deep. He couldn't bear the thought of the boy's life, cut short before his time. He couldn't let this lie. Now, his goal was unclear. Hiruzen remained Hokage. Minato had taken up the seat once, but he had no intention of forcing the man out of his position now. Perhaps he'd show himself to his predecessor, then allow the man to make the choice himself. There were surely better choices available for next Hokage, now. I wonder what became of Kakashi-kun. He realized he could not bear to stay on the sidelines. Nanake's Minato remained one of the most powerful shinobi of the village, and there was no way he could put that by the wayside, even if he preferred solitude. Not only would he be depriving Konoha of a great resource, something he'd worried over when he became Hokage, but also he'd be wasting his own time. He needed to get involved, to go after the bastards that had taken his most precious legacy. Besides, Minato was not the type to go wandering far and wide like his perverted old teacher. Speaking of that old toad, he needed to find Jiraiya-sensei. That man, more than anyone, deserved to know of the former Hokage's survival first. He had known what Minato attempted to do with the dead demon-consuming seal that had successfully trapped the Kyuubi, and could help figure out what his survival meant. The blonde-haired man should have been sealed in the Shinigami's stomach, forever, but he wasn't. What could have changed a god's mind? Minato had to find that out first. Perhaps his presence was a liability. Perhaps he was 10 years too late to do anything, 10 years out of time, stranded in an age he knew next to nothing about. Of course, Minato already realized that the last part was nonsense. The ninja world didn't change that much of it remained, as always, violent and confusing. People were played against each other, and the youngest generations paid the greatest prize for the oldest generation's gambits. He thought back darkly to the last moments of his life, his former life, as an example of that. Now, with little Naruchan's death, more than ever, he would keep himself incognito for now. It was for the best. Konohagakure was already in an uproar due to the disappearance of Naruto, who had apparently made friends in Konoha after all, even if they seemed to be almost exclusively his own generation of shinobi children and several old names his father recognized. Minato silently chalked those names up as probably trustworthy people. He would have to be careful who he informed of his return, though there were a few names that immediately came to mind. Jiraiya, obviously, needed to know first. He had already decided that. Sarutobi would have to be told. He didn't look forward to that conversation, as the old cadre would likely have many new ways of calling him inferior in humorous ways, especially now that he'd lost out on 10 years of training and forced the old man back into the position he'd retired from. He'd also have to find Rin and Kakashi. Really, those were already too many people. Minato hadn't even considered the clans yet. He'd have to gather intel on the current heads of the Uchiha, and Hyuga clans particularly. If he wished to have any influence without revealing himself, he would require such strong allies. He pondered distractedly over the odd observation that Konoha's military police force was apparently awfully downsized these days. He hadn't seen any since arriving. Minato covered his bright hair, his most recognizable attribute, barring perhaps the cloak he ditched somewhere along one of the rivers as he'd stumbled towards Konoha. Minato wondered briefly whether or not the clothes he was wearing now were actually the ones he'd been buried in. It seemed possible, and it would explain why the cloak had degraded so much. Jonin vests were made of far sturdier stuff, as were most shinobi clothes. He didn't particularly care much, if it was indeed what he'd been buried with. At least nobody else had been wearing it. He frowned briefly, as he knew for a fact that he'd have been buried in Konoha itself, like the other Kage, not out there somewhere in the wild. Minato smiled lightly as he hopped from his own stone head to Hiruzen's. Despite all the awful news that accompanied his arrival here, it seemed at least that one of his loves remained, much like he remembered it, the village of Konohagakure, the village hidden by the leaves, the greatest of all the hidden villages. He died to protect it once. He could not bear to leave it undefended now. Many of the villagers had acted awfully in his absence, but he'd heard of worse Jinchuriki treatment in other villages, and his son had known how to smile. He'd known it well. Among shinobi, he suspected he would find many of the anonymous donors that must have kept the boy going. Orphans never did have it easy, but Naruto had made it. He had been working to become a shinobi, and his father would make sure people remembered it. After all, Konoha no Kiroi Senko had returned. Who better to take up that cause? Jiraiya of the Sannin hurried back towards Konoha as quickly as he could manage. He had been nearby anyway, and a request for immediate assistance from Sarutobi himself could mean very few good things, particularly since it meant interrupting his usual spying rounds. The message had been short and to the point, delivered by a well-trained nin dog. It had requested his immediate presence, as well as some qualifiers that had him shaking in his boots. No Ika, no brothels. It had said. Completely innocent, really, except it was code, a code Jiraiya himself had developed. Suffice to say, the phrase meant that things had just gone completely, horribly wrong, the equivalent of a world without Ika and brothels. There was a soft pop and a cloud of dust, and a small toad the size of Jiraiya's palm appeared on his shoulder, balancing precariously. It was red in color and looked quite chipper. Yo, who are you? Jiraiya asked as he kept pace. I'm a little busy, little twerp. Go bother someone else. I think you'll want to hear this, the little toad said while clamping on tight, sticking out its tongue. I'm Gamakichi, nice to meet ya. Yes, great, what is it? Jiraiya asked irritably. Can't really speak to the old toad sage now, I'm afraid. I've got miles to tread, people to see. It's about the latest toad summoner, Namikaze-san, the toad answered nervously, and Jiraiya almost made a face fault before catching himself. You're joking, nah? Minato's been dead for 10 years. You're a little behind the times, bud. Now scram. Gamma-kick stuck fast though, refusing to let go despite Jiraiya's prodding. Gamabunta-sama sent me to tell you that he's not. The little toad stopped, gulping at the summoner's irate expression. He's not what? Fat? I'm pretty sure Gamabunta counts as super fat. Jiraiya said, chortling suddenly. Ha, please don't tell him I said that, he'd probably sit on me. Namikaze-san is alive, he says, Gamakichi blurted out, hiding his face. Jiraiya merely stared at the little toad for some time. Finally he sighed. Very well, I'll drop the antics for a bit. What's going on? I don't like morbid jokes, you know. Namikaze Minato is back in Konoha, Gamakichi said, concentrating. There was something else about statues? Something like that? You've got the worst memory ever, mate. Jiraiya said with a deep frown as he tapped the little toad gently. Gamabunta said that Minato's alive? He's not one to lie, but how could it be the truth? I don't know, Gamakichi said uncomfortably. I'm just a young toad, you should ask some of the big ones. I just got sent to tell you. Jiraiya did summon larger toads, but he'd have to summon nothing less than Gamabunta himself to get a straight answer since nobody else would even comment on the issue. Of course, summoning the toad boss was no simple request, and Jiraiya had a bit of a sake debt going with the old geezer, too. Finally the old lecher sighed deeply and with a forceful Kuchios no Jutsu, a great cloud covered much of the road and neighboring plant life. Jiraiya prepared himself mentally for the confrontation with the great toad leader. It'd probably be violent. Jiraiya-san, it is good to see you, Gamabunta said calmly. Jiraiya-san worked himself upright, staring at the great toad in consternation. Had the great toad just avoided taking the opportunity for a mean-spirited joke, or insult? Not even a good-natured slap. Gamakichi's told you what I discovered, it seems. Gamabunta continued, looking down from his great height towards Jiraiya's diminutive form. Your former student isn't quite as dead as I remember him. You must have met an impostor then. Jiraiya reasoned, pacing back and forth before the summon. You were there when he died, Bunta. Someone is playing a mean trick with us. He did summon the toads, Gamabunta retorted gruffly. There are not so many toad summoners that I would confuse them, Jiraiya. The person that summoned me sure looked like the Gaki, and he had power to spare too. Why did he send you to me? Jiraiya wondered. If it's Minato, somehow, why doesn't he just come and do his little flash trick? He gave me one of his sealed kunai, after all. I maintained it pretty well too. It should still work. Gamabunta stared down on little Gamakichi, who got the message. I'll be right back then, the little toad said, popping away. Waiting for the little toad's return, Jiraiya dumped the great bag on his back to the ground, rooting around inside to find the kunai in between unfinished drafts and a particularly juicy issue of his favorite entertainment magazine. The weapon was in a poor state, blunt and chipped, the seal tag somewhat worn. When he said he maintained it, he probably should have been clearer on the fact that it was only very occasionally. This had been one of the originals, used to develop the technique that would make Yondaime Hokage a legend. He held it up to Gamabunta. Found it, thanks sensei, said a familiar voice suddenly from where a moment ago had been nothing. A face with sharp blue eyes and blonde bangs smiled from mere inches away, one of the figure's hands holding the Hiraishin kunai by its handguard. I was running a bit low. And Minato, Jiraiya stuttered out, falling backwards onto the ground with a thud. Impossible, Minato smiled sadly, tapping his teacher on the shoulder. I share much the same confusion you must have. I'm supposed to be dead. More than dead, even. Instead, I am here. Minato dusted off his old kunai, giving the seal a quick evaluation. Would you believe I forgot you had this? Took quite a bit of juice to travel to it, too. It's lucky you were close to town. How are you alive? Jiraiya stuttered out. Gamabunta laughed throatily. I'm not really sure yet, Minato admitted. Be glad I am here, at least for a while. I suppose there's no need for welcomes back, given that we never really said goodbye. Minato, Jiraiya said in a sigh, ears seemingly vanishing from his face as it erupted in a broad grin. I have my favorite student back. I couldn't be happier. Yes, well, Minato said, and the dangerous glint in the man's eye was the only warning Jiraiya got. With a painful thud, Jiraiya crumpled to the ground, nursing his stomach where his student had placed well-aimed kick. Why? You left little Naruto to fend for himself. Minato spat, eyes sparking with fury. You left, and now he's dead. Jiraiya paled dramatically, steadying himself against the soil. Dead? Someone I don't know who yet took my son's life, barely a week ago. The best sensors in the village have been unable to detect even a whiff of his chakra. The whole of Konoha is buzzing with the news, quite a few of the civilians admitting to being glad about the whole affair. Minato turned away, lowering his head. The details are sketchy, but I do know that Naruto had just about become a genin, then he vanished. A few people were tricked with a shadow clone, probably from the attacker, and whoever it was has vanished with my son's body. Kyuubi would have protected him from attack, Jiraiya observed with worry, nursing his stomach. I doubt it had a chance. Listen, Naruto was nowhere in the land of fire when Sarutobi checked. I listened in on him, and Naruto had no time to travel any real distances considering the size of our country. Even my own seals failed to detect him given the average genin speed. He cannot possibly have reached beyond the edge of Sarutobi's seeing glass in such a short amount of time, nor my seals. We both know that there is only one other method of evading its grasp, and that is a road that we can only go down once. Minato sighed deeply. I have left the third to figure out where Naruto vanished off to. I have only the clothes on my back, and he is not yet aware of my return to life, let alone the rest of the village. You are, actually, the first I've told. Why me? Jiraiya asked, blinking, rubbing his stomach. Minato's harsh look softened as he looked at his sensei. There's many things to criticize about you. I would probably never stop if I got started, but I know I can trust you. You were the first I checked up on, to see if you'd survived. I know your importance to the village, the reason you are never in town. That is why I can understand your limited role in my son's life, even if I disapprove. I would request your aid now, though. The spies can survive a little while without your care. You would not have abandoned my boy if you could have helped it. I'm sorry, Gaki, Gamabunta said. It was remarkable, but the gigantic toad had almost been forgotten. A shinobi learns how to deal with loss, Gamabunta. I will not break under a stress such as this, though I will admit that I may cut loose when I meet those responsible for my loss. Minato shrugged, wiping a handful of hair out of his face. He needed to get his Hitaiite fixed. Time to reforge his ties to the village, it seemed, in every sense. Sarutobi has requested me back at Konoha anyway, Jiraiya admitted. How long will you remain hidden? With that hair, people will find you out in a matter of days. Minato nodded in response, his eyes far off. I will tell Sarutobi, you can be there, if you wish. Rin and Kakashi too, perhaps I can get my old team together again. Jiraiya grimaced, and Minato stopped in trepidation. He knew that look. Rin's been dead for a few years, the Toad Hermit finally admitted. For the last decade or so, Kakashi really only had himself. He's different from what he was like in his youth. If you meet him, you'll know what I mean. He's more like a Bito now than not, most of the time. Minato sighed, thinking back to young Kakashi, shortly before his own demise. Much of the old, strict Kakashi would show up from time to time, but a playful side had emerged. What would Kakashi be like now? Would they still understand each other like they once had? Perhaps they'd actually get along better with his student's overly serious side-tempered. Don't worry about him, Minato, Jiraiya said, chuckling, with a knowing look. I believe you'll get along splendidly. I think you might just be enough to get him out of his cycle of blame, though. His regret for his actions only seems to have grown with age. Later, Minato said, feeling like he had something stuck in his throat. Here he was, former Hokage of the greatest hidden village, nervous about seeing his own student. It was somehow much worse than seeing his teacher. At least he knew what to expect with the old lecher. This is absurd, you know, Jiraiya said after a long silence. You. Alive. In the flesh, still just as handsome. While you got old, Minato couldn't help but add, though he wasn't in the spirit of things. He turned and sighed. Well, for old time's sake, a race to the ramen shop? The race wasn't much of one, of course. Minato vanished into thin air after his last word, the space where he had been swirling wildly with turbulent winds. Jiraiya sighed tiredly as continued on his way, allowing Gamabunta and Gamakichi to return to their mountain. Jiraiya figured his student had probably planted a Hiraishin kunai at the ramen stand before he'd ever shown up to meet his sensei. Probably he'd be brooding on his own, waiting for the old man to catch up. Typical. Jiraiya had to confess that Minato pulled off infiltration rather well. Despite looking like a former Hokage scratch that, being a former Hokage, he'd managed to find a spot at the bar in between two seasoned jonin, seemingly without changing anything more than his hair. He'd have to figure out how he pulled that off sometime, the white-haired sage thought. It had taken the better part of the day on Toad back to make it to Konoha, as opposed to his incredibly quick student who'd probably been taking a long-needed nap. Minato put on a wide smile, pointing at 3 stacked cups next to him. Jiraiya sighed. It figured that the first thing his resurrected student would do is gorge himself. The Toad Sage waited near the wall until his student finished off his current cup and one more, before he'd finally had enough. Man, I missed that, Minato confessed. Jiraiya-sama? Jiraiya blinked at the formal form of address. One of the jonin at the bar raised an eyebrow at the presence of the Sannin. Minato had used him as distraction. Well, that explained that. Minato slipped out of the door as several people finally noticed Jiraiya's appearance, and started muttering to each other. "Oh, you gonna pick up the tab?" asked the store clerk with a raised eyebrow. Jiraiya sighed. Right, that would be the reason his students slipped out. The two found themselves on top of a nearby apartment complex, Jiraiya putting down his backpack and several tall scrolls, while Minato was distractedly looking for holes and gashes in his clothes, the only set he had. He could swear it was falling apart, almost as if time was catching up with the fabric. "We'd better think of what we're going to do, old man," Minato said with a glance at Jiraiya. "As much as I like being alive again, it can't mean anything good. Someone's messing with the natural order. It cannot be a coincidence that little Naruto was, that he vanished the same week that I returned. Perhaps the same day even." Jiraiya nodded tiredly. "The first thing to pop into my mind is a group of missing nin that I've been hearing rumors about. They call themselves Akatsuki. I hadn't expected them to be quite as organized as to pull off this, though. Infiltration and assassination in the middle of Konoha?" Minato sighed, threading a hand through his hair. "There are 1 or 2 people from before my death that may be responsible. They'd certainly have the malicious intent, but I have no idea whether or not they're even still around, or why they'd bring me back. Considering the only jutsu that would do anything like it, as far as I'm aware, would be rather recognizable if it had been used, I'm at a loss," Jiraiya answered. "Kuchios, Edo Tensei, developed by Nidaime Hokage Tobarama Senju, might have been used, if your soul had resided in Johto. Besides that, you're way too alive to be one of the zombies summoned with that technique. I've read the Kinjutsu scrolls, sensei. Remember, I had access to everything before my death. The possibility crossed my mind, but it seems unlikely. I get chills considering the concept, honestly. Whatever this is, it goes a lot further. A technique that would rip a soul from Shinigami-sama himself." Minato dropped himself flat on the roof. "I thought my battles were over when I sealed away the demon. It seems Kami does not wish to let me rest just yet." Jiraiya rolled his eyes. "I know you think you're hot stuff, Gaki, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's find out exactly what happened to your son before we draw conclusions." Minato nodded, getting back to his feet with a grunt, a determined look on his face. "Whoever is responsible for my resurrection may well be responsible for Naruto's disappearance. If that is the price for my return, it is too great. I won't allow it. I will look for the person who did it first, before I visit Sarutobi. I'm in town anyway, I'll help you out," Jiraiya answered lightly. "Though I disagree about not informing the Hokage. He has the right to know, you're aware of that." "You'd better help," Minato said grimly. "You have reparations to make for your negligence. Don't think I've forgotten. I'll think about telling Hiruzen, alright?" Jiraiya gulped and nodded as the two leaped off the roof and vanished. It had been over a week since the new Genin teams had been formed. The 2 new rookie teams had been assigned to do a new D-class mission in Konoha itself, escorted by 2 Jonin. Both the rookie teams and several previously active ones had been sent out to find a shinobi that had vanished, presumed dead. Uzumaki Naruto. Shikamaru paused briefly as he turned another corner, noting the position of Yamanaka Ino and Akimichi Choji some distance away, searching other parts of the back alley for any sign of their target. Their team was one that covered a lot of ground quickly due to great teamwork, not unexpected considering the close ties between their families. The disappearance of Naruto had done little to Ino or Choji. Either had known the boy particularly well and both were far too caught up in finally reaching shinobi status to really worry about it. Ino was convinced the boy was merely playing another prank. Shikamaru was different. He thought back to a few days earlier, the day of the team assignments. He'd been at home when Hitaki Kakashi, famed Jonin, had dropped in unannounced while he and his father were competing in a game of shogi. The look on the shinobi's face sent chills down Shikamaru's back in an instant, and his father broke off his friendly greeting in the middle, a concerned look appearing instead. "It's about Uzumaki Naruto," Kakashi said with a glance at Shikamaru. That one-eyed look was icy and fiery at the same time. "I need your help, Shikaku. I'm bringing Inoichi into it too." "What happened? Is he dead?" Shikaku asked with a glance at Shikamaru. "Should we take this elsewhere?" Kakashi wondered, gesturing at the young shinobi who was trying to make sense of what was going on. "Naruto dead? He is my son, Hitaki. He can handle it," Shikaku said with a scoff. "I take it that the boy has been killed?" "The Hokage believes so, I'm afraid I agree. Something's gone terribly wrong. Someone must have infiltrated the village without anyone noticing and taken him. We're sending out teams to search for him, but odds are," Shikaku nodded sagely. "If the Hokage fears he is dead, it seems likely. He has knowledge of things we do not, and may well have secondary ways of verifying Uzumaki's status that we miss out on. It seems prudent to track him down regardless, though." "Naruto is dead?" Shikamaru said finally, looking remarkably attentive for once. "How did that happen?" "He was there when teams were assigned." Shikaku turned to his son with a serious look. "Uzumaki Naruto was more than a mere genin graduate to this village, Shikamaru. The Hokage kept a close eye on him, as did others. He had more enemies than most shinobi his age. His disappearance is worrisome. This has to do with the reason almost everyone despises him, doesn't it?" "What a drag." Shikamaru glanced at Kakashi in worry. "Is the village safe?" "You're too smart for your own good sometimes," Kakashi muttered as he pointed out the window. We'd better get going. The sooner we start searching, the sooner we have confirmation. The genin teams will be reassigned due to the urgency, including the rookie ones. More eyes and all that, as you can understand. Can I do more to help? Shikamaru wondered, frowning. He got no response. He knew Naruto as a loudmouth troublemaker, but the boy had never seemed particularly special otherwise. All this attention seemed rather bizarre. The Hokage himself was involved? Elite Jonin like Kakashi too? Who was Uzumaki Naruto? He's pondered on the question for the rest of the day. He couldn't fit the common dislike into the picture beyond that the boy played a lot of pranks, and that seemed rather petty justification for the loathing. He'd had suspicions about Naruto for a long time. He had suspicions about everyone in his class, of course, but now they seemed all the more plausible. He stared out the window at the Hokage monument. There was one possible reason the Hokage cared so much. Why'd they call you Uzumaki then? He muttered. Shikamaru continued to consider the possibilities even now, as he and his team were searching the outskirts of town for a sign of Naruto. Even the customary genin test had been skipped this time, replaced instead with this mission, which would gauge their teamwork in the field. He was about to call out to Ino and Choji and head for a new area when he noticed an obnoxious shade of orange from the corner of his eye. He lowered himself to his knees and peeked through a grate that was designed to let rainwater into the sewers. There was only one person who wore that shade. Shikamaru ripped the grate off. It was rusted a bit, but still gave way with a groan. The sewer pipe was a little more than waist high and slightly slanted downwards towards the edge of town, where it would deposit its contents in a subterranean cavern complex. He lowered himself in. He could wash off the refuse later, he reasoned, as he found what he feared. Asuma! He called, as he grabbed the unmoving body by the armpits. When he moved it into the light, he gulped. Blonde spiky locks were unmistakable, as was the cold and waxy feel of the skin. Asuma! He tried again, breathing heavily. He'd of course heard many stories about what shinobi got up to, even seen the results, but he'd never been this close to a dead body before. Especially one he'd known in life. He shivered involuntarily. Finally, Sarutobi Asuma appeared next to the sewer. He only took one glance before he dragged both Shikamaru and the body out of the hole. I see, he merely commented, opening one of the bags on his vest and retrieving a whistle. Shikamaru didn't hear anything, a dog whistle, then. Hatake Kakashi was with them in an instant. Shikamaru hadn't had time to get up yet, even. Kakashi's grief-stricken look was unmistakable. I knew it was probably true, but Kakashi said softly, glancing at Asuma, then into the sky. I have failed you again, sensei. Shikamaru couldn't help but gasp when he heard that. Kakashi turned to him with a sad but knowing look. Don't tell anyone, clever Nara. Kakashi picked up the body carefully just as Ino and Choji arrived, noticing the jonin that had joined Shikamaru. Stay here, Shika. We might need to search that sewer pipe in a bit, Asuma said. We're taking him to the Hokage. Was that Naruto? Ino asked as the two left, trembling. He looked dead. You already knew we were looking for him, Shikamaru pointed out as he gazed after the two jonin who were quickly making their way to the tower. Presumed dead, remember? Yes, but Ino continued. Naruto dead? How could that? Shikamaru sighed. He'd accepted this eventuality since day one, but then he'd had more information. Sometimes it was a drag to be considered mature. He gestured to his teammates, as he lowered himself to the ground across from the sewer entrance, leaving the two for a moment to gaze at the sky. I hope you're happy up there, Naruto, he murmured, sighing. I suppose I should call you Namake's Naruto, now? How bothersome. It's true, then. Sandaime Hokage said, as he gazed at the body that Kakashi had brought with him. Asuma bowed and left immediately to join his team again. Kakashi sighed deeply as he rubbed his aching eye. It was Nara Shikamaru that found him. I believe he's also figured out a bit more than he strictly should regarding Naruto's identity. That boy is interesting. I am not surprised, given that boy's parentage, the Hokage answered. He's clever enough to keep any conclusions he draws to himself. It is a concern for a later time. Kakashi nodded, unable to take his eyes off the corpse of his would-be student. A few days in water-clogged sewers had not done him any favors, and only the fact that both men were used to the smell prevented them from backing off. He was stuck down a sewer pipe. It's possible he was dumped into the water at the north side of Konoha and merely dragged in by the current. That would put him outside Konoha's walls. It seems more likely than the alternative. Who would be capable of killing Jinchuriki with apparently little fuss, but then stuff the body down a sewer grate? Would they not simply burn it? The Hokage sighed as he grabbed the zipper on the boy's bright orange jumpsuit. We must check the seal, first. Jiraiya-sama's not back yet? Kakashi tried as he looked on. He would know best. Jiraiya hasn't been seen in town yet. I'm afraid he must have had to come quite a distance, or the Nikken didn't find him in a timely manner. I'll have to discuss it with him when he arrives, the Hokage sighed deeply. I doubt Jiraiya wishes to see me, given that I let his godson be hurt. It'd better be important, whatever he's doing, Kakashi said. Not even I would forgive him if he was slacking off now. The Hokage opened up the jumpsuit. The smell was horrible. Decay had set in. Thankfully, it hadn't been quite long enough for the skin to vanish. Naruto's stomach was blank. The Hokage carefully sent chakra into the body, but nothing happened. The old man frowned. That is strange. Let me see, Kakashi said as he shoved his Hitaide up, uncovering his Sharingan. Do it again. Kakashi gazed on as the Hokage filtered chakra into the dead body. It spread out but didn't do anything, and it certainly wasn't channeled through a seal. It's gone. Kakashi whispered, horrified. The seal is gone. That's not possible. The Hokage looked conflicted. If it had been broken, the seal should have been in pieces, but still there, even in death. If it had held, it should have been intact, though no longer active. This isn't a possibility I foresaw. What does it mean? Is the fox out? Kakashi wondered with a panicked glance. The village wouldn't survive another Kyuubi attack. It's worse than that, I fear, said the Hokage, slumping into his chair. The only options I see remaining are all bad. A transference ritual of some type, moving the seal onto another person. We'd have a rogue Jinchuriki on our hands at best. Alternatively, someone prevented it. Space-time ninjutsu. What do you mean, prevented it? Kakashi wondered as he considered the possibility of fighting an enemy demon container with control over the worst of the 9 localized changes in space and time, the Hokage answered. It's possible, though rare, for some dojutsu and Kekkai Genkai to have that ability changing one part of reality, to take out the Kyuubi. What would that mean? Kakashi wondered. The worst. The Hokage answered. If someone prevented the sealing of the demon, if someone broke the rules of time and space, we have no idea what might happen. The destined future of our world may have changed. All things we know could be destroyed. If someone prevented the sealing, Kakashi mused, worriedly. His eye widened. If the sealing was prevented, if someone had changed a part of the past, that meant, where is the demon? Where is Kyuubi? Jiraiya landed softly on the soil just outside Konoha's walls, a waist-high toad wearing something akin to a haori, bright red and with orange tassels. He turned to the wall, squinting against the sunlight. The toad for her part vanished in a puff of smoke, her job done. Minato joined him after a minute, appearing next to Jiraiya in an instant. His face was as if set in stone, cold, and with a hint of anger. What's it now? Jiraiya asked, scratching his cheek. Someone recognized you? An idiot was celebrating the demon's death, Minato said, narrowing his eyes. I had to take care of it. You didn't kill anyone, I hope? Jiraiya asked half-jokingly. He'd been worrying over Minato's odd mood since their reunion. He seemed rather jittery and high-strung. The man had reason to be, of course, but it didn't feel right to see his student silently suffering like this and not do anything about it. I was tempted to do something drastic, Minato admitted under his breath. I let him off with a warning. I'd have gone further if he'd been a shinobi, though. Jiraiya sighed, walking northwards. Gamatansi said she smells something about a mile upstream. We'd better check it out. Best lead we've had so far, I'd say. Jiraiya scowled. He'd assumed tracking the seal would be easy enough, but neither him nor Minato were able to sense even a hint of its chakra. Minato followed without a word, scowling as he pulled off the cloth that he'd used to cover his bright hair. It felt wrong to hide from the very villagers that he'd sworn to protect, even if he couldn't quite decide why they deserved it right now, but it was necessary. He had no idea what the reaction would be to his reappearance, especially from other nations. Sometimes it was really problematic to have a high profile. For now, it was best to keep his identity hidden within the village. He'd have to set up some alter ego soon enough. The stream the two followed went on for miles, though it winded through the land in great loops, nourishing the rich soil around it which was frequently used to grow some of the pickier crops. It must have had a name, in older times, but these days it was just another nameless stream, one of many that had found a new course near the city in the aftermath of the Kyuubi attack. Here we are. The location they'd arrived was no different than most of the rest they'd passed, clear land surrounded by thick forests, overgrown with weeds. Jiraiya gazed around worriedly. This is where the smell came from. What's supposed to be here? Minato wondered aloud, seeking for anything out of place. Last confirmed location of Naruto. Jiraiya said carefully as Minato stiffened. At least, the most recent smell that my toads could sniff up. They're nowhere near as good at tracking than dogs. Perhaps we should bring Kakashi into this, now. Minato sighed, rubbing a hand over his face as he closed his weary eyes. Only if this lead doesn't pan out. I am really not ready for facing him. Facing anyone, really? So, if this is his last location, Jiraiya continued finally, acknowledging his student's wishes to wait, the most obvious place he could have gone is in the water. There would be a scent leaving this place if he was taken from here. This is a sewer stream, Minato observed. It runs under the town and is dumped in the caverns on the other end, isn't it? He'd have found his way out given the narrowness of those canals and all the exits. Minato, Jiraiya started, worriedly. You yourself told me he was most likely dead. It's not like you to cling to false hope like that. If he was dumped here, odds are he was beyond saving himself. You know where the sewers lead. It might have been meant as a message. Minato growled in annoyance, gripping one of his kunai so harshly he bled. He shuddered, pulling himself upright. Gaki, don't hurt yourself like this, Jiraiya said tiredly. It's okay to let it out, you know. I'm hardly one to blame you for it. I'm a shinobi, sensei. Minato snapped, his eyes briefly closed in pain. I was Hokage, for Kami's sake. I will not let emotions overwhelm me, not when far more important things are at stake. You must know the importance of a clear mind. I cannot afford this. Minato stuttered to a halt and grimaced. He flashed away on that strangled note, leaving Jiraiya at the waterside in contemplation. Minato had never been like this since they'd met. He'd been calm, collected, friendly. Not much of that was visible now. The demon attack must be only days ago to the man's mind, let alone what happened when he returned, losing a son he'd only just met. Jiraiya looked after him in worry. How long before he'd collapse like a puppet with the strings cut? Minato, meanwhile, returned to the wall, staring at the grates covering the sewer's entrances. He'd covered up his blonde locks again, just in case anyone looked over the wall. All but 2 of the sewer grates were present, but that was quite enough. Naruto could have gone through those. He stepped gingerly onto the water, concentrating to get his chakra flowing properly and gliding over the surface. Jiraiya arrived at the side of the stream, watching silently. He must have gone in here, Minato said after several drawn-out minutes in which Minato merely stared at the water gushing into the pipes under his feet. Listen, we should inform Sarutobi, Jiraiya said emphatically. I know you don't like the idea, but we can't go around doing an investigation without letting the Hokage know. You alone is bad enough, you're not even supposed to be alive, but I've been identified a bunch of times, and I was supposed to check in as soon as I arrived. Then go, leave me to the search. Minato answered, glowering. You're coming with me, even if I have to drag you, the Toad Hermit answered. You don't get it, do you? Even the Great Yellow Flash and all that can't do this by himself. Odds are, shinobi have already been set on the task. It's been days, a week perhaps. If they haven't found anything by now, they probably won't. We'd have to go to the caverns, and there's no easy way in there. Not without the Hokage. You forget that I am a Hokage-sensei. You forget that you're not anymore, Jiraiya pointed out. What do you think they'll do when a strange shinobi goes and checks out forbidden locations like that? When they rip off that rag you wear on your head, they'll think you're an imposter. Minato sighed deeply. Fine, we'll go see Sarutobi. Just let me search this place. Just in case. Jiraiya looked on as Minato suddenly vanished beneath the water's surface. He dispelled the tracking toad he'd taken along with a quick goodbye and drank a good long swig of sake. It paid to be prepared for the kind of confrontation that was undoubtedly coming. Hey, sensei, came Minato's voice and he looked up. Minato held a forehead protector attached to a long green shawl. Which village has a musical note as their symbol? XXXXXXX. Shikamaru Nara sat alone on his rooftop, staring in the distance at the passing clouds. It had long been one of his hobbies, though few of his friends could appreciate how calming the practice really was. Today, he felt like he needed it more than ever. Finding a friend's dead body had affected him more than he thought. Sure, Naruto had been a friend in much the same way as the rest of his class. He didn't know particularly much about the boy, and if not for the unusual attention that he got from such people as the Hokage and even ANBU guards, he would have never even noticed his presence. The fact that he was unusually loud contributed too, of course. Finding him propped up in a sewer drain in the middle of town, cold and unresponsive, was about the last thing he'd expected. It didn't fit. He'd expected the orange eyesore to be playing pranks on the Hokage monument, or voraciously consuming ramen at Ichiraku's. He'd seen no wounds on the boy's body, but judging from the expressions on Asuma-sensei's face, it was more than a mere accident. He'd seen the man in worrisome silence several times, lost in thought after innocuous questions asked about the boy. Hataki-san had been the weirdest. He wasn't very familiar with the man. Shikamaru knew that his dad worked with the ninja before and that he was a renowned fighter, but that was about it. The fact that Hataki had looked so very affected by the loss had started gears turning. He'd recalled many of the things he'd suspected in the academy. Firstly, there was the physical resemblance. That had been obvious. He wondered idly how blind some people were that they didn't see it. Add to that the unusual care given by the Hokage and his guards, and it would suggest that Naruto was somehow special. Hatake Kakashi's personal involvement, extremely telling. The fact that Jiraiya of the Sannin had apparently been recalled to Konoha? Only one conclusion could be drawn. Of course, that led to many more questions in Shikamaru's mind. Ones without answers. Being the progeny of that man would hardly be a reason for hatred. It seemed that if anything, it'd be a source of great pride for the village. Most likely, nobody knew about it that didn't make the conclusion for themselves. Which meant that the loathing was likely unrelated. Thinking deeply again, Nara figures that the silver-haired Jonin would seek him out. Troublesome. What are you doing here, Hataki-san? Shikamaru asked, looking sideways from his position on the roof. Hokage-sama sent me to inform you that the medics are done, Kakashi said in a subdued tone. It is not a decoy. I didn't believe it was. Shikamaru responded, rising to a seated position. Kakashi sighed. I thought you should know, given your role in this awful business. Hokage-sama says there will be a funeral for Naruto within a day or two. All the genin from his class will be invited. Any clues on the bastards responsible? Shikamaru asked, narrowing his eyes. He might not have been closest to the boy, but nobody got away with murdering a shinobi of the Leaf right in his hometown. There's some suggestions that IWA is involved, but it seems mostly because it's the obvious pick. Whoever it was likely didn't want the body found in town. They probably expected it to drift to the lower caverns where the sewers end. The Hokage should have been the one to discover him, we think. A message, perhaps. Does IWA know about you know? Shikamaru wondered as he joined Kakashi in gazing over the rooftops and across Konoha. Naruto's heritage? Not as far as we are aware, Kakashi answered. Of course, that's assuming we know everything that goes on in IWA. Shikamaru frowned deeply, puzzling out the most probably attackers. Is there any chance that it's a more personal revenge? Naruto himself has done little more than pranking, so that seems unlikely, Kakashi answered with a shrug. It's possible that it was related to his family or other difficulties, though. It seems a bit late for it, though. Vengeance can last in the mind for a long time, the genin pointed out. Especially among shinobi. Perhaps the fact that he was becoming a shinobi got people agitated. Neither spoke for a while, content to watch the sun slowly sink towards the horizon. Shikamaru puzzled over who might want to kill Naruto, while Kakashi mused on yet another name that would be added to the memorial plaque. Another name he'd failed. Hokage-sama has recalled Jiraiya of the Sannin to Konoha. I hear he's already in town, probably already gathering information. He was Naruto's godfather, Kakashi said finally, rubbing his covered eye with the cloth covering it. Godfather, huh? Shikamaru observed. I'd never have figured Naruto to have so many secrets. He just blurts out everything, usually. You'd think he'd brag about these kinds of connections, considering his spiel about becoming Hokage. He didn't know, Kakashi simply said, looking down sadly. The Hokage would have told him some things, had this not happened. As I recall, he'd hear it all when he reached Chunin. Shikamaru sighed, shoulders drooping. How troublesome. I feel bad for the guy. At least he's with his parents now, I suppose, Kakashi said wistfully, looking listlessly over the town. I suppose he'll get better reception than he ever did in this town. I'm sure he's happy. Shikamaru didn't respond, instead pulling out a curious kunai he received a day or two before from Ino, who claimed to have found it on one of the roofs near the hospital. Shikamaru had been intrigued by the strange design. The moment he started juggling it, though, Kakashi's eye went wide. Where did you get that? This? Shikamaru asked with a raised eyebrow, raising the knife. It was a large kunai with 3 points, a long handle. Ino found it. Was just gathering dust, so I figured I might find out what it's for. That's one of Sensei's kunai, Kakashi said half in a whisper. Was there a seal on this? Shikamaru nodded. I removed it, since I didn't know what it did. You mean to tell me this is a relic of Konoha? It's notched and worn, the jonin observed. That's not a replica, I think. That's the real article. I thought they'd all been recovered long ago. It's been years since the last. Sensei used them for his signature technique, Hiraishin no Jutsu. Shikamaru concluded, studying the kunai. I suppose I could have guessed, though I don't remember ever seeing pictures of these. That's because they're not generally just given out, Kakashi drawled. These kunai are way too sensitive to leave lying around, in case someone manages to recreate the jutsu. All the ones found were destroyed, I believe, save for a few in the possession of friends. The last intact batch is stored in a museum someplace, I believe, behind lock and key. So where did this come from? Shikamaru wondered, twirling the kunai around. Most likely it's Jiraiya's or the Hokage's. It must have been stolen. Alternatively, Kakashi paled. The fourth was buried with a set as well. Shikamaru put the kunai in Kakashi's hand at that. Better get it to the Hokage then. Considering the fourth's connection with Naruto, it might be more than a coincidence. Kakashi nodded, ready to take off, but hesitated. You are okay, right? Yes, Hataki-san, Shikamaru responded with a sigh. I need to visit some other genin first. I'll deliver it later tonight. Take care. I'm glad I could help with your little brainstorming session. Shikamaru retorted. Kakashi was gone before he could finish the sentence, springing across roofs with the experience of 1,000 similar trips. Shikamaru lowered himself back to the roof, groaning. What a drag. Jiraiya of the Sannin walked into the office of the Hokage with an uncharacteristically morose expression. Sandaime Hokage Sarutobi couldn't help but skip the friendly antics he would have employed otherwise. Minato entered after him, though he had his face well concealed and was wearing a nondescript robe over his vest. The Hokage didn't seem surprised by his arrival, though that could probably be accounted for by the implicit trust in Jiraiya the old man had. I wondered when you would come to speak to me, Jiraiya. There were other matters to deal with, Jiraiya said shortly, his eyes hard. I have been following some leads that required my attention. I don't understand why you waited as long as you did with warning me, the Hokage sighed sadly. I understand, but I am sure you've heard what's happened in Konoha. You warned me something like this could happen, but I'd not expected it so soon. The first warning that something was amiss was perhaps a few days after the disappearance. Whoever did it managed a convincing act using a Kage Bunshin. What do you mean? Jiraiya wondered aloud. Currently it's thought that Naruto disappeared from the village 2 or 3 days before the Kage Bunshin dissipated. His sensei Iruka reported strange behavior in those days when asked about it, and there was an unusual incident the night after graduation. The Hokage cleared his throat, putting his hand on a large scroll propped up on his desk. Mizuki, A sensei at the academy arranged for Naruto to retrieve the scroll of seals from my office, which is full of kinjutsu. The scroll was indeed taken, though about an hour after Naruto returned with it, stating that he realized Mizuki can have been serious. You believe that? Jiraiya asked in bafflement. He must have copied it. You are right, though my credulity was understandable, I think. Naruto was always great at making up crazy explanations for why he did dumb things. It was really quite entertaining. I initially suspected that the boy merely wished to show that he was capable of something more difficult. He showed me an effective use of the Kinjutsu Kage Bunshin, and I thought nothing more of that. The fact that he learned it in an hour seemed just the kind of thing that boy would do. So what changed? The clone was evidently long-lived enough to last until quite a ways into the day after graduation. Given that the teams then meet and are usually left to their own devices for the night, it was presumably intended for the fake Naruto to dissipate after the first team meeting. The Hokage continued with a sad smile. Unfortunately, whoever was responsible did not take into account who exactly this team's sensei was. Kakashi arrived just after his two teammates saw the Naruto clone disappear. You didn't contact me immediately then, Jiraiya pointed out. I know when the graduations are for the academy. That's a week and a bit ago. You should have warned me immediately. I thought about it, the Hokage admitted. I was going to, but I was hesitant about being too rash. I had no clear way to contact you since I didn't know exactly where you were, so I went with some of the more unreliable ways that you gave me. Forgive me, but the best tracking shinobi were out of town, so I used one of the Niken. Jiraiya agreed immediately. You didn't wish me to just cut and leave given that I had a job to do. I can appreciate that, at least. It's just if someone came after Naruto, that's more important than any of that. Do you believe it could be Akatsuki? Sarutobi questioned, leaning forward with eyebrow raised. I doubt it was that group, Hokage-sama. Jiraiya said shortly. This shouldn't be discussed with so many listening ears, sensei. Not even your Anbu, Sarutobi nodded. Please move out of hearing range. The old man said it to thin air, though muffled footsteps could be heard. I trust the Anbu with my life. I expect this is important. I'd think so, Minato said dryly. The third Hokage blinked, trying to place the familiar voice. The target of his confusion gingerly removed his hood, unveiling his pale face, framed by locks of bright blonde hair. Sarutobi gave a startled gasp before jumping to his feet with remarkable agility for his age. What is this? He said aloud, narrowing his eyes. What reason do you have to take that form? Cease the henge at once. It is my actual face, Hiruzen, Minato replied with a bit of mirth. I do believe I have the right to wear it. Sarutobi looked at his successor skeptically. There are few resurrection jutsu, and those I know of are forbidden for a reason. How can I believe you appear back to us here at such a very convenient time? Jiraiya? I have no doubt about his identity, Jiraiya stated. I've seen him use Hiraishin no Jutsu, which nobody has replicated. Besides that, I have been in close proximity since we met. He found me using the old Hiraishin kunai I still had, as well as the summoning contract for the toads. It's him all right. Sarutobi slumped down deep into his seat, staring at the apparition before him without blinking. I never thought I'd see you again. Minato rolled his eyes, scratching the back of his head in embarrassment. I didn't expect it either, you know. I did use a suicide technique after all. So what happened? Sarutobi asked. Who brought you back? What possible jutsu could do something like this? I don't know about a who or why, though I have my suspicions, but I have an answer for the last one, an answer that's been staring me in the face. Minato answered, raising one of his special kunai. You know how my Hiraishin works, right? At least in principle? Direct teleportation using the kunai or a seal as the focus, correct? Right. This is a focused application of Fuin Jutsu. That much you know, but it's also a focused application of a space-time jutsu. I am not well versed enough in that particular field to say much more, but I know that there are superior users of this type of technique. He looked down darkly, staring at the dagger. I know, I fought one. He could do things I thought were impossible, and I long suspected that there were more. You raise a disturbing possibility, the Hokage answered, frowning. An option that unfortunately has come up already just days ago, when we discovered that Naruto's seal was missing. The seal is missing? Jiraiya asked, frowning, before glancing up in consternation. Minato froze in his seat, his eyes wide in realization. How could you know that? Sandaime Hokage sighed deeply, before looking Minato straight in the eyes. We found your boy, Minato, we found Naruto. One of his classmates discovered the body lodged in the sewers. Jiraiya sighed deeply, looking at his pupil with troubled eyes. Minato, meanwhile, still refused to move, glancing quickly between the two. I'm sorry, Jiraiya started, but he was cut off. Where is he? Minato burst out with a strangled gasp, jumping upright. Where is Naruto? His body's been moved to Ibiki's morgue. A funeral has been planned, but due to villager unrest it was delayed a bit. You are able to attend, if you wish, the Hokage said, looking at his successor with tears in his eyes. I'm sorry, Minato. I know how much you would have liked to meet him. The man in question had blanched pale white, trembling. You'll take me there right now. I want to see him. The two complied, Jiraiya had the sense to quickly shove Minato's mask back up to conceal his features before they came across anyone else in their way down the tower towards the interrogation department. That said, the procession of Sandaime Hokage, Jiraiya of the Sannin and an unknown masked shinobi raised quite a few eyebrows along the way. Thankfully no words were shared, as Minato didn't think he could have stopped from shouting. Finally, the three entered Ibiki's department, which besides interrogation also kept one of the few cooled mortuaries in the village, mostly used to study bloodline limits of foreign nations or missing nin, when samples became available. Ibiki was there, but quickly moved out at the Hokage's instructions without asking any questions. The moment they left, Minato surged forward to the bright mop of blonde hair he'd spotted on one of the slabs. Naruto, Naruto! No! Jiraiya and the Hokage stood by uncomfortably as the legendary yellow flash slumped down next to the small body, crumpling to the ground as his legs could no longer support him. Tears flowed freely as the man took the body into his arms, cradling it and weeping through the soft fabric that covered most of it. Naruto's pale form seemed merely asleep, though he looked gaunt. This wasn't what I wanted. You were to be a hero. The Hokage remained at the door. Jiraiya moved to his student's side. Minato, Jiraiya glanced at his mentor who looked down with tears in his own eyes, dabbing at them ineffectually with his sleeve. Minato didn't say anything for a time. He held his son's body in trembling hands, his eyes intermittently seeming heartbroken and made of cold ice, promising retribution. Finally, he spoke again in a soft near whisper. I will torture and kill whoever did this to my son. This wasn't what was meant for him. He was supposed to be a hero of the village. Not shunned as a demon. Not dead. Perhaps it would have been better if he'd never hidden his identity. He had nothing, Sarutobi sighed, as he stood up and flanked Minato on his other side. I meant to protect him, and though he had a tough life, he never gave up. He managed to make contact with some kids of his own age due to my law that forbids speaking of the demon. As far as I'm aware, only one family has deduced anything about your relation to him, and it's a friendly one. Nara. Jiraiya muttered, rolling his eyes. I understand, Hiruzen. Minato finally said, the flow of tears trickling to a halt as he wiped his eyes, trying to regain some composure. You did what you could. I should have been there. The sealing should never have happened. The whole thing, it was a mistake. You saved the village. The Hokage said with a friendly smile. You saved thousands, indeed, Naruto did as well, even if many will not acknowledge it. You made a tough choice, and one with awful repercussions either way. I don't think even you believe that your sacrifice was in vain. Minato blinked and sighed. I'm not quite objective here, I suppose. It's just, I can deal with sacrificing myself. I'd set myself to do it, and I was willing. I never intended to condemn my own flesh and blood to a life of persecution, and least of all a young death. Gaki Jiraiya tried, but Minato shook his head before he could continue. I've heard enough of your self-pitying declarations in the last day to last me a lifetime, sensei. I can understand why neither of you were as close to Naruto as I would have liked. You had other commitments. Minato stood up gingerly, lowering the slack body of his son back to the table he'd lifted him off, trying to ignore the eerie cold. He looked at the two sharply, gritting his teeth. We have to find the bastard who did this and end the threat to Konoha. I will volunteer to do it myself. If you owe me anything, you at least owe me that much. Sarutobi slumped, though he nodded after a while. You are certainly capable enough, if you're anywhere near what you were when you died. For the moment you have the element of surprise, we can use that. I will have to introduce you to the council at some point, under an alias, of course, to excuse the use of resources. I have an idea about that, actually. Jiraiya said in realization. You'll make use of that rumor? Ingenious. Rumor? Minato wondered, his eyes fixed on his son, his hands clenched until they were white. There has been long-standing gossip that I have taken on a new student, in secret. Sarutobi retorted with an embarrassed look. People kept noticing that I disappeared with some regularity, and my ANBU didn't go with me. I was spotted with scrolls a few times when leaving, though nobody managed to track me. Scrolls for academy students. I encouraged the rumor, as it would remove attention away from my actual activities. Jiraiya snorted. In reality, Sensei was just visiting Naruto at his apartment. The ANBU would never report on private dealings of the Hokage to the council, and there's nobody in that area that would ever be considered trustworthy witness even if they spotted the old man in the first place. Minato smiled at the third, blinking away his tears. You did keep an eye on him, then, as an old friend said too, as often as I could spare them. Sarutobi rubbed his face tiredly. I just seen the boy the night before all this started, or what turned out to be a simulacrum now. I did think him a bit demure, but then, he just failed at the academy for the third time due to failing to make enough clones. I graduated him on the spot that evening. I suppose his relatively mild reaction should have rung alarm bells. I just attributed it to stress. I've chosen to maintain the graduation as it was based on his overall effort, much like Rock Lee, rather than on anything that happened that evening. His name will be on the memorial stone. I know it's not much but enough recriminations. Jiraiya growled, looking fierce. We need to find the bastard who did this. I suggest me build a team with that express intent. Sarutobi nodded. I know we cannot keep you in the village for extended periods, especially not now, given the impact these events may have on our neighbors. Minato, you'll lead this group then? Seeing as you have experience enough to take a Kage position, I'd think you were suited. I'd better, he muttered darkly. I want Kakashi in, he shuddered. Well, just Kakashi then, Sarutobi immediately agreed. Of course, he's one of our best shinobi in this time, and he no doubt jump at the opportunity. I dare say he'd give his good eye. Who else? Jiraiya muttered under his breath. I suggest going over it with Kakashi. He has more experience than either of you with the current shinobi, as well as a lot more insight into who can be trusted with this kind of assignment. I'd think twice about including any genin, Jiraiya scoffed. Genin? Who do you think we are? Sarutobi shrugged. You'll find that Hataki-san can be quite convincing, and he does have a soft spot for some of this generation, even if he doesn't like to boast about it. He's more like Guy than he realizes sometimes. We spoke earlier, he has his eye on a new gem, it seems. Minato didn't answer, instead turning away from the two of them. I'll find Kakashi later. Could you? I'll wait outside, Jiraiya said with a tap on Minato's shoulder as he and the Hokage left the room. Take all the time you need. Minato didn't answer, though his shoulders shuddered with suppressed sobs. Kakashi stood by the memorial stone, his eyes closed as he thought about the newest addition to that rock. It had been engraved an hour earlier, and a permanent ANBU guard lurked nearby now since several villagers and a disgruntled shinobi had tried to remove it again with blunt instruments and a kunai. Uzumaki Naruto, it said right at the bottom. He sighed deeply, trying to think of what he could have done differently, as he always did in this spot. He realized quite quickly that he was in no position to have any influence at all. He'd barely had any real contact with the boy in all his life, at best seen the orange-clad boy in town being a menace. The day of the team assignments was really going to be his true introduction to Sensei's son. Then, he died. You look awful, Kakashi-kun. Kakashi whirled around, eyes peeled. He winced as he realized he'd not put his Hitai back yet, and his Sharingan blazed a light at the stranger who'd approached him. His transplanted eye twitched as he realized that the man before him was awfully familiar. Minato stepped forward in trepidation, having waved away the guard as he arrived using one of the ANBU commands that Sarutobi had told him about just before he left. I need your help, once more. Who are you? Kakashi snapped in annoyance. He froze as Minato stepped closer, his bright blue eyes clearly visible through the holes in his mask. And no, Minato sighed as he carefully took off his mask. This is going to happen every time, isn't it? No wonder ANBU never take their masks off. Why you? Kakashi backed up against the memorial stone, blinking fiercely. His Sharingan could see through Genjutsu. He was not looking at any illusions. No jutsu were in use at all, it seemed. How are you alive? Despite the apparent lack of illusions, Kakashi pressed his nails into his hands, trying to use pain to break free. Sandaime Hokage and Jiraiya are discussing the matter as we speak, Minato said, rubbing a hand through his hair as he nervously looked around. The place was indeed deserted at this time of day, as Jiraiya had said. Best guess, it has to do with whatever happened to Naruto. Tears threatened to spring back into his eyes, but he blinked the feeling away. Whatever did that, it brought me back. Sensei, Kakashi said uncertainly, then almost ran forward, clasping his arms around the man. For a moment, Minato could imagine the young shinobi again that had joined his team, the young genius that had really only broken down once or twice. He embraced his student, a smile appearing. Kakashi grabbed onto him as if a lifeline, shuddering. I couldn't leave you out of the loop, it wouldn't be right. Seeing as I'm building a team to go after whoever did this, I formally request your assistance. Minato smiled slightly, letting Kakashi go. The man looked thoroughly shaken up. Really, I just want you back on my team. Of course, Kakashi answered, his eyes wide and the Sharingan whirling madly. Of course I'll be back on your team. Did you expect me to say no? Minato shook his head with a smile. Sarutobi figured that's how you'd react. Say, let me take you out for a drink. I can put up some privacy seals so we can catch up. You can ask me 100 questions to verify my identity, like old times. Perhaps you can suggest some other people that we can take along on our mission. Nara, Kakashi said immediately, staring up into the sky. He's got to be there. Shikaku and you actually work together these days? Figured you geniuses didn't mix that well. Minato answered with a smirk. Though given how people describe me, I suppose that's a bit hypocritical. Kakashi gave an exasperated look, shoving his Hitai down over his eye. Not Shikaku, his son. Shikamaru, Minato answered uncomfortably. I did get warned about he's in. Kakashi answered, smiling behind his mask. If need be, I'd give him a battlefield promotion. He's got the skills, he'd probably pass the first exams he'd take part in. I see you haven't changed that much from how I remember you. Minato muttered under his breath, leading to an even broader smile. Still the forceful personality, You haven't changed a bit. Kakashi answered jovially as he dragged the former Hokage along to the nearest bar. Must be weird, missing a decade. You've missed quite a few Ika books, you know. Pervert. You read Jiraiya-sensei's books too. Only the one. Aha. It wasn't porn. Interlude. Kakashi. The Pewter Flagon Inn wasn't a well-visited establishment. It was well outside the city core and visited largely by civilians with little or no real respect for shinobi force, which led to the latter avoiding the place. The most palpable reaction to Kakashi and Minato entering was barely concealed fear and hesitation. Most likely they were under the impression that Minato was ANBU, a group that had a reputation even here. A waitress quickly pointed the two to the far end of the room, one of the more secluded corners bordered by plants in such a way that it was largely out of eyeshot of the rest of the inn. It was not hard to guess that it was a place specifically for any shinobi patrons so that they wouldn't scare off the civilians. The waitress herself was gone the moment Kakashi and Minato sat down. Both were well disguised, thankfully, so nobody recognized them coming in. Not the classiest of places, sensei. Kakashi drawled dryly as he casually glanced over the few people staring at him in mixed fear and awe, though several looked as if they'd stomp over and start cursing him out. Nobody will report an unknown seal user here, Kakashi. You know half the ANB would be on alert if someone started using my tricks in the middle of town. I don't think my predecessor, and successor I suppose, would really like that kind of attention drawn to me at this point. Now hold on, let me draw up that's unfortunate. Kakashi looked on in amusement as his sensei retrieved a pile of what looked like dead leaves from his pocket. It took him a moment to recognize that it was a large amount of partially rotten sealing paper. In fact, I can actually see that rotting, sensei. What on earth did you do to it? I was afraid this was going to happen, Minato retorted. This was on me when I got to town, it's decaying now. It already happened to most of the rest I had won me. My kunai degraded beyond use and most of the clothes I had on me are full of holes. I expected these to hold on longer given that they contain chakra, but that's not going to happen to you, is it? Kakashi gasped aghast as he stared at the paper that was falling apart. No, don't worry. I suspect that the stuff I had on me was generated out of chakra. Difficult but possible. Similar to clones, really, although far more exact and built out of natural elements rather than a single one mixed with a henge. Unlike all these material possessions of mine, I have a chakra circulatory system, so I maintain my own supply. This seal paper, I'm afraid, simply ran out and is returning to its base elements. You don't happen to have a sealing kit on you? Just some paper for explosive notes, Kakashi said as he tried to get the disturbing image of a rotting sensei out of his head. I don't have any ink or such. Minato inspected a few brushes he pulled from inside the vest Jiraiya had bought for him to replace the one he'd lost. These should do for now, though they'll start going bad soon enough. They're probably lasting this long since they're based on chakra-infused wood. Hold on. Kakashi looked on with interest as his sensei bent over the strip of chakra-sensitive paper he'd supplied, fiddling with a long fiddly brush and a tiny bottle of ink to make a detailed and intricate figure. The man cursed and removed a line or two a few times. Kakashi sank back into the bench as he felt a warm feeling he'd missed for years, and thought he'd never feel again, like he'd come home. He could almost imagine himself, Rin and Obito sitting like this, looking on and commenting on how long it took their sensei to come up with a new seal as they'd done back when their genin team was still complete. Obito would be distracting himself while he himself would have stared in barely concealed wonder. There we go, Minato finally spoke with a grin, glancing over the seal once more. One privacy seal for the price of none. He poured a little chakra into it through his hand and it shone softly, the seal's chakra rippling outward in a barely visible wave that covered the two of them, and then vanished. Well, that should take care of anyone recognizing us. Why do you need paper again anyway? Kakashi wondered as he cancelled his disguise and nodded at the seal on the table that still glowed. Thought you did everything with that nifty touch seal thing now? Minato scowled, rubbing his neck. That's just for when I know the seal already, Kakashi. If I accidentally mess up a seal with that, I could lose my hand. Besides, I doubt the inn would appreciate me etching seals into their tables. Kakashi smiled as he leaned back. Minato removed his mask and breathed in deeply. Ah, fresh air, how I miss you. You should have just used henge like me, Minato scoffed. People who want to look underneath the underneath would just recognize you and think nothing of it. You're a ninja of the village. They'd hardly criticize you for going around undercover from time to time. Me, that'd be tougher to explain. Minato knocked the ANBU-style mask on the table. These things are good enough to counter most techniques designed to look through disguises, and the reputation of the ANBU keeps people from asking too many uncomfortable questions. I suppose, Kakashi admitted. Now spill? How on earth are you back? I have no clue, Kakashi sighed, dropping head to the table. It figures you of all people would accidentally figure out a way to get back from the dead. What, did one of your seal experiments get lucky? Minato smiled thinly in response, a sudden sadness in his eyes as he looked back at his student. I believe whatever happened to my son is responsible. Whoever did that and messed with my seal probably didn't intend for this particular side effect. He sighed deeply. Space-time ninjutsu seems plausible, and that would probably mean that something messed with the seal in ways I'd never foreseen. I think we'll notice soon enough who is taking advantage of what's happened, and perhaps I'll find out who raised me from the dead as well. I'm glad you're back, sensei, Kakashi said after a few minutes. I know it might be selfish of me, but after Rin I'd have given almost anything to get any of you back. It's been lonely, all on my own, even if I'm supposed to be a proper shinobi now. I suppose Obito had more of an impression on me than anyone anticipated. He gave a bright eye smile and then without any fuss he shoved down his face mask, showing off a bright smile. This eye's still one of the best days of my life. Minato chuckled in amusement as he ruffled Kakashi's hair. Last time I saw you, you were still a brat. Jiraiya's been telling me of your exploits. You're practically the strongest shinobi in town these days, aren't you? I expected as much back then, but to go as far as you did, I'm proud. Kakashi grinned in response, pointing to his mask. You know, I haven't taken this thing off since you died for more than maybe a few moments. I figured since I really only ever took it off while we were training as a team, I'd keep that tradition. Let me guess, everyone's been trying to get a peek ever since. Kakashi nodded, a haunted look appearing in his eyes. Even Guy's been known to try and sneak a peek. It's creepy, I tell you, Minato snickered as he remembered the green-clad shinobi. He hasn't changed much, then? I thought I saw him come by a while ago, but it was some kid with the same garish green outfit. That'd be his prize student, Rock Lee, Kakashi pointed out. He's been prodding me about getting my own mini Kakashi for ages now. I was slated to have yet another Genin team tryout, but well, you know what happened. Minato nodded seriously. You failed the two others just like that. They must have been mad at you. Kakashi shrugged. They were a bit mad, but the reason for it made them clamp up quick enough. The Uchiha actually looked rather stricken. I think he and Naruto had a bit of a rivalry going. Minato sighed, freeing up his blonde mop of hair and twisting it in his hands to try and focus on anything but the feelings that wouldn't stay down. The last Uchiha, When I heard about that massacre, I couldn't believe it. I've still to discuss it with Sarutobi. Uchiha Sasuke's the last in Konoha, yes. Kakashi responded. The other one was Harino Sakura. Pretty smart but pretty much an unknown to me besides that. Civilian parents, so I have no clue about specialties. Medic Nin, maybe? Minato hummed in acknowledgement, fiddling with his Itaiate. They'll have another shot soon enough, and they'll probably get right back on a Genin team given that they were good enough this go-around. Some comfortable minutes of silence passed, the two simply enjoying being in each other's presence again. Minato couldn't help but notice that they were about the same age now, and that Kakashi had grown up to look more like his old man that he'd expected, especially with the mask off. Kakashi looked as if he was staring back in time itself. I don't know if you want to talk about it, Minato finally said with difficulty, looking uncertain. Could you tell me what happened to Rin? Kakashi closed up, grimacing. The silence persisted until Kakashi finally breathed out deeply. It's not a happy story. I really don't want to talk about it. Minato nodded in understanding. Just tell me when you're ready. If you wish, I can ask Sarutobi instead, if it's too difficult. No! Kakashi blurted, cringing. If anyone's to tell you, I will. Just give me some time. It's difficult enough to believe you're back with us. Dredging all that up would be. I get it. Kakashi didn't say anything for a time, glancing at Minato from time to time. Finally, he spoke. It must be strange, returning to a world with so many new things you barely know. It's not so different as all that, Minato answered with a thin smile. Jiraiya-sensei hasn't changed a bit. The third is as he's always been and you just got old. I'm not old. Kakashi blurted out in horror. We're about the same age. That's not old. If you say so, Minato agreed amiably. It's just that white mop of hair of yours is starting to look far more appropriate these days. Sensei, Minato laughed. I feel like I'm old myself from time to time, you know. The perils of living as a shinobi, I suppose. I was thinking about the fact that technically I haven't trained in a decade. I wonder if I'd still rank among the best. You're still the yellow flash, aren't you? Kakashi observed dryly with a drooping eye. Unless you're a shell of your former self, and you don't seem to be, I'd guess you're fine on that front. Perhaps we should spar sometime, Minato said reasonably. I think I'm pretty much as strong as I was before my death, and that's a weird thought, really, but it's not like I can test it like I did back then. Imagine calling in 30 ANBU to duel an anonymous nin with Konoha Kenjutsu and my specialties at his disposal. The council would go mad. Kakashi smiled as he looked absent-mindedly through the inn, subconsciously looking for threats. Nay, sensei? What are you going to do? You can hardly just waltz back into town, can't you? The council would hardly take that easily either. Sarutobi and I have made arrangements, Minato admitted, tapping his mask. I'll see to painting this thing and putting some of my own seals on it so it can serve as a proper guard of my identity. Then I'm joining the third in a meeting with the council. I'm to take the role of the Hokage's rumored student. Kakashi blinked, then raised an eyebrow. There's a certain irony in that situation, isn't there? Minato nodded as he thought back to Sandaime Hokage's description of the rumor. In a sense, I'll be taking standing in for Naruto. It feels appropriate, I suppose. I'll only have the disguise until it's no longer necessary, until the mission's complete, or my identity is so compromised keeping it hidden is unlikely to work any longer. It'll be quite a shock to see you back alive, I think. I know it is for me. Kakashi answered, rubbing his neck. I haven't been this animated in years, honestly. I have no doubt it'll be shocking, Minato retorted with a smile. Imagine the look on Danzo's face. I'm not sure what emotion will win out. Danzo, Kakashi muttered darkly. You'll probably want to look into him. He's not as he used to be. Minato looked on worriedly. He's not still pursuing that thing, eh? His root project? Kakashi waved it off. It's probably nothing. He's just been even more secretive than he used to be, and he got some injuries along the way without any clear reason. He just rubs me the wrong way. I'll take that as advice then, Minato said with a warm smile. Now, have you found a girlfriend since we last met? Kakashi spluttered in protest. No. I don't think reading the book in your pocket's going to help matters, you know. Kakashi laid a hand protectively on his Ika and shook his head in alarm. I'm not just going to go out with random women like Jiraiya. Who do you think I am? You're more like him than you realize, Minato said with a cocky grin. I'm not, Kakashi responded with a wide eye. Minato finally reluctantly agreed with Kakashi's proposition that we was not nearly as bad as the super pervert, and the two chatted on about what happened in town over the last decade until it was late at night, and most of the civilians had gone home. About 6 of them remained as the privacy seal finally began to flicker. Looks like the ink's going too, Minato said in exasperation. I'll need to buy all new sealing supplies, it seems. How embarrassing, Kakashi smiled as he pointed at the NBU mask that was still balancing on the edge of the table. Better put that on or you'll get mobbed by everyone. Minato reluctantly put on the featureless mask and covered his hair while Kakashi put up the henge that hid his hair color once more, his most recognizable feature, and the easiest to hide. The privacy seal fizzled out with a small tendril of smoke as the last of the ink evaporated. As the two shinobi moved to leave, several of the civilians gawked at them, starry-eyed. Kakashi blinked uncertainly at Minato, who chuckled softly in response. Mask. Kakashi blinked for a few moments, trying to dissect the statement. He cursed colorfully. He was so used to having his mask on all the time he'd forgotten that he'd pulled it down. Sensei. Minato didn't stop laughing until they'd left the inn far behind. Hokage-sama. No need to be so formal, Kakashi, Sarutobi commented mildly, getting up from behind his desk. You must have noticed that my ANBU are not here. I've been expecting your arrival for some time. Kakashi sighed, slumping down into the seat opposite the old man's desk, rubbing his eye absent-mindedly. I had quite an evening last night. I take it you met your new team leader? Sarutobi answered knowingly. He's already been by this morning to inform me of what you discussed. I hope he didn't have anything too terrible to say about me, Kakashi quipped. What's this about? I understand you have requested a genin to be a part of the search for Naruto's killer. The Hokage answered seriously. I would normally ignore such a suggestion as complete nonsense, but I'd like to hear your side of the argument. You've built up enough credibility with me and the village to sweep your suggestions aside. You should be flattered. Minato actually seemed somewhat impressed by whatever argument you brought up. It made me curious. Nara Shikamaru, Kakashi supplied. I've been in contact with him a few times over the last few days. He left a bit of an impression. I don't know if you've noticed, but he actually might be smarter than his old man. Sarutobi silently looked on, raising an eyebrow. The young Naro's highly intelligent, and jumped to correct conclusion regarding Naruto's heritage given little data. I suspect he'd already had his suspicions but was simply never able to confirm them. I've dug into his public records and found that his school grades are just good enough to pass. That doesn't seem very impressive. He's just like Shikaku, Kakashi pointed out. Received the exact points required to pass without even a little bit more, which would imply that he knew all the answers and merely chose to fill in those required and no more. I take it you took advantage of your access to ANBU files, Sarutobi concluded as he turned his chair, looking out over the village through one of the windows. He had some idea where this was going, given that this wasn't the first time a Jonin sensei had come to him about mismatching public records and actual capability. He still remembered well the day that Ibiki sensei had come to him in exasperation about that very topic. You found something. I found the sealed tests and measurements that the Nara clan keeps safe in the private ANBU library. They've got a blood seal on top as well. Thankfully, Shikaku was willing to indulge my curiosity. You bribed Shikaku. Nara Shikaku. The Hokage looked baffled. Right, Kakashi confirmed, smirking sheepishly. I traded several artifacts I retrieved from my ANBU days for the opportunity to take a gander into his family's records. Sarutobi coughed under his breath as he turned. It seems you have built quite a friendship with that family. Not even I have had access to most of these types of files for any family. In fact, I'm pretty sure that such things are supposed to be kept strictly within clans. Kakashi shrugged neutrally as he grinned, tapping on a paper he'd retrieved from his jacket. The crux is, I came across Shikamaru's sealed test results. They were remarkable. In what way? Every way, Kakashi drawled as he shoved it over. Superior potential for the use of Nara family techniques, unusually high IQ, superior tactical insight, and a well-hidden but powerful drive to improve, when sufficiently motivated. That's just the simple stuff, this the Hokage said as he studied the file. Are you sure I am allowed to read this? I didn't know one could be tested for half these things. I checked with Shikaku. Kakashi confirmed. He's under the impression I want to take his son on as a personal apprentice. I didn't disabuse him of the notion, but it's probably best if he'd informed about what's actually going on if we take this route. He'll find out on his own sooner than we'd hope, especially when he's spotted with more people than just me. Shikaku's allowed me to show you, and only you, these files, so it seems you have also gained some loyalty from that clan. The Hokage nodded, still looking at the notes from the Nara family files in consternation. If it were the Uchiha clan, I'd consider this boasting. For the Nara clan to actually allow people insight, though they have never been the most likely to stand front and center and show off. Shikamaru's being wasted as a standard rookie genin, Kakashi said dryly. He'd be promoted in the first exam he went to, undoubtedly, and that's without special training. If we're completely honest, he could probably have gotten out of the academy years ago. If he'd been properly motivated he would have. He could have been like you mean? The Hokage noted in amusement, leading to Kakashi blinking and stuttering sheepishly. What he needs is a goal. A proper sensei too. The motivation we could use is obvious. Shikamaru was the one that discovered Naruto's body and his heritage. He knows that somebody's trying to cripple the leaf. He'll step up to defend it. As for a sensei, the Hokage caught on and nodded. You want Minato to do what he did for you. You must realize though that your situation was different than the boys. It is, Kakashi acknowledged. Nevertheless, my time as Minato sensei's student helped me in many ways, and allowed me to get away from the rut I was stuck in beforehand. Shikamaru-kun is in a similar situation. He's been content to be laid back and uninterested, and he's squandering his talent that way. Perhaps he is the opposite in some ways from what I was, but not in the essentials. Very well, Kakashi, Sarutobi said finally. I will allow Shikamaru to be on your team, but only if you and Minato take personal responsibility for his training and survival. I want him to be at least Chunin level as soon as you can manage it, and to keep him out of direct confrontation until he's able to handle it, particularly if it turns out that high-level threats are involved. That seems a likely prospect, and I'd rather not risk a fresh genin's life, no matter their chosen career path. Thank you, Hokage-sama. You'll have an ANBU keeping an eye on you while in town, Kakashi. The Hokage said shortly. If it turns out that the boy cannot keep up, I'm moving him back to his genin team. What's going to happen to the other two then? Kakashi wondered. I've been considering rearranging the teams. Seeing as Choji and Ino are already full genin, they may be able to simply continue with an additional genin teammate from elsewhere. Danzo Shimura's offered me a few promising recruits that would be suitable, though he will not be available for some weeks yet. Danzo. Kakashi sneered. No need to get so snappy, the Hokage said. I know full well what you think of Danzo and the council in general. I thought about doing something similar with Naruto's team members, but I received some disturbing observations regarding the Uchiha. He seems driven by revenge more than anything. I'm afraid that he'd go rogue before we realized it. Very well, Kakashi answered. I'll go find Minato. He's supposed to be talking Shikamaru into joining the team. Before you'd even checked in with me? The Hokage asked, blinking. Well, I suppose if anyone knows what I'd do in this situation, it would be a former Kage. Sarutobi laughed briefly, stroking his beard. It will be interesting, I think, to have Minato back with us. For one, I finally have someone to foist the paperwork on. Yes, Hokage-sama, Kakashi said, looking away in embarrassment. Kakashi, the Hokage said after a moment, his face suddenly serious again. I'll be introducing Minato to the council later tonight, if all goes well. He'll be using his old mask. You know what that will mean. Are you sure that's smart? Won't people realize? The fourth is dead to almost everyone, and Minato wasn't the first to wear that mask design. The only thing that would convince people that something strange was going on is if you suddenly act as if you are accepting of the mask's use. I well remember your protests when it was considered to pass it on to another user. I suppose, Kakashi allowed. It'll be a pain, but I guess I'll do it. As long as Sensei knows it's just acting, I can get mad at him. It'd be a great way to get away with insulting him, too. Just remember that you two actually have to work together, too. The Hokage answered. I'll argue that I reissued the mask since my apprentice has signed the frog summoning contract. Don't you mean Toad? Frog. The Hokage said again. Most people won't know the difference, and the mask has only been known as the Toad mask since Jiraiya's use of it. As long as Minato's careful not to summon Gamabunta or another immediately recognizable Toad summon, it'll be fine. As you know, the actual frog contract is under lock and key in my archives, and it'll stay there. So, Minato will be taking up the mantle of Kiru, then? Kakashi asked, then snorted. How fitting. Which meaning of that name did you really intend? Frog or to return home? The Hokage smiled slightly, winking. It did seem appropriate when I thought of it. Good afternoon, Minato said as he landed lightly at the entrance to the Nara compound. Both Shikamaru and his father were present, and playing a game of shogi which the younger seemed to be losing. Jigama-san? Shikaku asked, raising an eyebrow. I didn't know that your mask was back in use. I am Kiru. Minato answered shortly, glancing at Shikamaru. I am here on behalf of the Hokage and Hatake Kakashi to speak to your son. Shikaku's eyes lit up, looking unusually attentively at his guest. Minato had heard that the man was actively at work on Naruto's disappearance along with Kakashi and several others for the past week, and this was only one of the first days he'd been back home. He was probably tired but decided to spend his time with his son instead, something Minato could well understand. A deep ache in his chest refused to leave and he glanced away from the two before he could consider it further bothersome. Shikamaru said as he moved the gold general on the shogi board. We'll finish this later, Dad. Certainly, son. Shikaka said, sending a speculative glance at Minato. Seeing as you are walking in broad daylight with the toad forgive me, frog mask, I assume that Sarutobi's finally stopped being covert about his side activities? Figures Nara would be the first to jump to such a conclusion, Minato mused. If you are referring to the rumor about the Hokage's apprentice, correct. I'll be attending tonight's council session. I'll be sure to attend, then I had expected someone younger. Shikaka answered with a nod. Shikamaru, do not agree to anything permanent until you have discussed it at home. If the council's involved, it is wise to look at all sides first. I understand, father. Shikamaru answered. When you return, perhaps we can discuss further the relative merit of the king. Shikaka moved a piece and smiled smugly. 3 moves and you're done for, son. Shikamaru glanced at the board and smiled himself, turning away. He followed Minato's cloaked form quickly, his hands in his pockets. Nara-san, Minato said as he led the young genin into one of several nondescript houses that were regularly used by jonin as temporary homes when doing covert business. Take a seat. This will only take a minute. Minato proceeded to draw an elaborate seal, nowhere near his best, but sufficient to keep out unwanted intruders. Shikamaru looked on with interest, an eyebrow raised. The boy hid it well, but he couldn't quite obscure being tense from the Kage-level ninja across from him. Minato finally slapped the seal paper on the wall, infusing it with a substantial amount of chakra enough to cover most of the house. Immediately an awareness of his surroundings crept into his mind, a side effect of the seal that would send information on what crossed the boundary back to the owner of the chakra in use, much like the functionality of a Kage Bunshin. I am here on behalf of the Hokage and Hatake Kakashi. As I previously said, Minato began, taking a seat across from the genin. As of this morning, you have officially been removed from your genin team. What? Shikamaru said, perplexed. None of us did anything. It is not a punishment, Minato answered immediately as he waved it off. Hatake Kakashi observed that your talents were not being used to their full potential, and suggested an alternative to being on a rookie genin team which would undoubtedly keep you back for years as your teammates lagged behind and had to catch up. Don't talk about Choji and Ino like that. Shikamaru growled with a stony expression. I am certain Akimichi-san and Yamanaka-san are excellent genin, but we both know you are more talented than either, Minato said. For that reason, the Hokage agreed that you should be given another option. If it doesn't work out, you are free to join your genin team again. They will not be removed from the roster with your absence. Shikamaru looked on in suspicion, his eyes sharp. What is this option? The Hokage has been assembling a specialist team to track and detain the person or persons responsible for the murder of Uzumaki Naruto, and the probable release of the Kyuubi demon. Minato shuddered inside as he said his son's name, though he didn't think the boy had noticed his reaction. Hatake Kakashi is on this team, as am I. Kakashi suggested you as a third member. Why? He put forward several reasons, some of which I am not allowed to disclose, though your father may tell you if you request it. Minato answered. The key fact is that your potential is being wasted, and we do not yet have an intelligence specialist on our team. Hatake-san will be taking responsibility of tracking down leads which will take up too much time to allow for proper tactical considerations, and it has never been his specialty in any case. If I can be classified as anything, it would be for mass destruction and assassination. A fourth member of the cell has not yet been found but would likely be a medical expert. You wish for an untested genin to take the role of intelligence operative in an undoubtedly classified and high-level jonin unit? Shikamaru wondered, frowning in confusion. I question your wisdom. Question it if you wish, Minato answered gently, then straightened. Naro Shikamaru, this is an official request from the Hokage. Should your performance be unsatisfactory, you will return to your genin team and follow the usual track to Chunin and onward. The Hokage, or rather I am offering you the opportunity to rise to your full potential in a far shorter time frame while working for the defense of Konoha and its people. Think about it. I'll do it, Shikamaru said almost immediately, then snorted. I'll have to discuss it with my dad, of course, but I'll do it on one condition. I won't work for a faceless ANBU, Kira-san. Very well, young Nara. Minato answered, carefully grasping the side of his mask and moving it down to his neck in one movement, his piercing blue eyes looking directly at the shocked student as his blonde bangs escaped from the cloak. Why you? I see that I have managed to pull the wool over Nara's eyes this once, Minato said with a broad smile. It is a first time for everything. So what do you say, Nara? On a team with 2 geniuses, one of which is supposed to be dead, and I probably can't tell anyone? Shikamaru summarized, slouching in his seat though his eyes betrayed excitement. It'll be troublesome, but the answer is yes, Hokage-sama. Minato will do in private, though you should probably stick to Kiryu. Minato replied, as he put his mask back on and shoved his bangs behind his ears. He should think about cutting those, they were getting in the way constantly. I'll look forward to working with you. I'll await your final answer after you've spoken to your father, wouldn't want to undermine his authority. You can tell him everything except my identity, of course. Please do not look into my return, it is classified and could get you into trouble. Shikamaru stayed in the boarded-up room for another few minutes after Minato left, staring at the seal on the wall that was slowly crumbling away now that its source of chakra had moved out of range. Here I thought I'd gotten all the surprises of the week already. How troublesome. Minato paced the length of Kakashi's apartment that he was using as a temporary home, occasionally glancing up to see if he could find any sign of the Jonin. His former student wouldn't be joining him in his visit to the Konoha Council. Only the Jonin commander had that right implicitly, but they could grab a bite to eat beforehand. The Konoha Council wasn't much of one, though there was an occasional larger council. Sarutobi generally only had his former teammates Mitokado Hamura and Yudatane Koharu as his private council. They'd been part of Minato's larger council too, mostly because nobody could quite imagine not having them around at this point, so at least he knew what to expect. Nara Shikaka would be there, at least, which would probably even out the odds regarding reactions to his presence. He'd not be revealing his identity to the council, for one. Danzo would undoubtedly catch wind of whatever went on in the meetings, and there were probably other people that were even riskier to expose himself to at this point. Shikaka would probably figure out at some point, but he'd keep quiet about it. It would work for now. Ah, sensei. I'm not your sensei anymore, Kakashi, Minato answered lightly as he turned. You've gotten quite good at stealth. I barely even noticed you arriving, Kakashi scoffed. You haven't put up any seals that I can see. How does it count when you're not even trying? I figured I'd better not advertise the presence of a seal master, Minato supplied. The kind of array I'd need to use for that would probably attract rather more attention than the minor stuff I've been using. Several Jonin got curious about my privacy seal at the safe house this afternoon, and it was only there for about 10 minutes. Namikaze Minato relegated to using the simplest of seals, eh? Kakashi said with a grin under his cloth mask that was all too obvious. I imagine it's like Guy without his orange legwarmers. Minato muttered a curse under his breath, glancing at his frog mask on the table. Unlike the one he'd painted himself, this was the original, the one that he himself had occasionally used while not yet Hokage, and Jiraiya before him. It had originally simply been another ANBU mask, which would regularly be reissued to new ANBU operatives. Jiraiya-sensei had briefly used it when working alongside ANBU troops. He nicknamed it his Gamma mask, and since he summoned toads it quickly became associated with the Sannin. He'd been gifted the mask by his sensei when he'd reached Jonin rank, and he'd worn it to battle. As it turned out, Sarutobi had decided to keep the mask out of rotation after the Kyuubi attack, after Kakashi and several peers had loudly proclaimed that the mask could only be passed on to a ninja worthy to be named in the same breath as its previous users. In reality, Kakashi had intended the mask to be saved until Naruto could take it up, a reminder of his father. Minato grimaced as he picked up the off-white sculpted mask. Taking the mask up again was nostalgic. He hadn't had a use for it in many years, give or take a decade if he counted his time being dead. Passing it on to his son would have been fitting, he mused. Sensei, Kakashi said as he put a hand on Minato's shoulder, who had been looking at his Gamma mask for several minutes, barely concealed tears hiding in the corners of his eyes. You know he would not have begrudged you taking it up in his stead. How would you know? Minato spat, and he immediately felt apologetic about his outburst. I'm sorry, it's just that everything's so strange for me right now. 2 weeks ago, I was fighting for my village, sacrificing my life. Now I'm hiding in other people's homes, taking my son's place, whose life was cut short. It's not a fair exchange at all. I know it's not, Kakashi said, frowning. I wouldn't begrudge you cursing everyone for what they did to Naruto, and myself for being negligent in my duties. Nobody intended this to happen, you have to at least understand that. I know, Minato answered, slumping as his anger vanished. I know I can't blame any of you, much. You certainly didn't drag me back from death or killed my son. But I have to do something. Find the one who is responsible, Kakashi answered. You've already got 2 team members. Arrange a final member and we'll set out as soon as we can manage. Barring unforeseen circumstances, this could become quite a powerful team quite quickly, and we could do more than just our primary objective. I know what you're expecting, Kakashi-kun, Minato answered with a slight, sad smile. You want a team of geniuses, another team of Sannin, perhaps. Take care of all the bad stuff so that the village won't have to. It doesn't really work like that. Perhaps not, Kakashi agreed. I can hope, though. We have you again. If there's anyone that can make it happen, it's got to be the Yellow Flash. Minato nodded, working himself upright. Well, I'll have to go see the old people, I guess. They're even older now than they ever were, I suppose. I'll have to walk too. He sighed. I'll need to get a trustworthy blacksmith to craft me some new kunai. I'll look into it, Kakashi answered as he walked to the window and clambered through. Shikamaru said yes, correct? Of course, Minato answered. He was surprised, a rare occurrence that. Kakashi said with one of those infuriating eye smiles. Minato thought back to the perplexed expression on the kid's face. I can't even imagine Shikaka with such an expression. Perhaps I should hop by before he figures it out to see if my appearance will get him to loosen up. Sensei, of course I won't. Sheesh, Hiruzen, it's good to see you, Hamura Koharu. Sandaime Hokage said as he welcomed his two advisors into the room. Nara Shikaka had already found a seat near the window, gazing out unconcernedly. Minato stood by the Hokage's desk, his hand on a privacy seal array that he'd written up a few minutes earlier. Do come in. Has something come up? Koharu asked, frowning at the two people already in the office. I hadn't expected an audience. Oh, come now, you must have known that I'd do something about recent events, Sarutobi answered with a fake smile. Nara-san and Kira-san are here at my request. Kira-san? Hamura blurted out, suddenly noticing Minato's mask. You have finally decided to gift the mask to a new user then? Indeed. The Hokage answered as Shikaka moved to close the door and Minato activated his seal with a burst of chakra. I have decided it is time for my apprentice to step out of the shadows, as his services are required. So the rumors were true after all. Hamura said, betraying no emotion. I'm sure you understand the need for secrecy, Sarutobi said as he took his place behind his desk and the two took their own seats before it. Kiro-san has been a long-time friend of mine that prefers to remain anonymous in his dealings with other members of this village, and I chose to tutor him myself after he reached Jonin level. That much was true, though of course that had really happened about 20 years ago. For what reason have you chosen to bring him out of anonymity? Koharu asked, frowning. He will remain anonymous, for now, except from the members of his unit, of course. He will be leading a newly formed team responsible for tracking the killer of Uzumaki Naruto. Ah. Hamura observed neutrally. This is why the Jonin commander is here, yes? I am here by Hokage-sama's request, Shikaka said softly. The newly formed team concerns me personally, after all. Surely you aren't thinking of putting the Jonin commander on a strike team, Sarutobi? Who would take the lead in his stead? Koharu glanced apologetically at Shikaku. Shikaku will remain where he is, Sarutobi said as he turned around a stack of paper on his desk and shoved it forward. Naro Shikamaru will be taking the role of intelligence specialist on the newly formed team alongside Hataki Kakashi and Kiru, with a fourth member undecided but likely hailing from the ranks of the medical nin. You propose to put a genin on this team? Hamura asked, blinking. Preposterous. Koharu blurted. Sarutobi glowered, tapping the stack of paper he'd put forward. Here is the paperwork. He's transferred as of this evening. It's signed by his clan head and himself. It's done. My reasons for doing it will remain my own. You want us to just accept this? Putting genin in a jonin's job? Koharu asked, staring at her former teammate in exasperation. Surely, Hiruzen. Must I remind you who is Hokage Yudate-san? The Hokage asked, leaning back. I have decided on this placement on a provisional basis. We'll see how it goes. I have reason to believe that the young Nara will flourish under the guidance of Hataki-san and Kiro-san. That will have to be enough. I will allow it. Hamura answered, glancing at Minato, who had remained silent and besides the Hokage's desk for the duration of the argument. Have we ever met Kiro-san in person? You have likely met me at some point. Minato answered, grinning behind his mask. He'd applied a voice modulation seal to the inside of his mask that should make his voice sufficiently different from his normal one to remain inconspicuous to his former acquaintances. I will however remain anonymous to all Konoha citizens until such a time as I elect to reveal it publicly. Any particular reason? My family name would likely cause trouble with some of other countries, which is why Sarutobi-sama requested that I forewent its use when I arrived in this village. Okay, that was a lie, but at least it was a probably one, given the number of orphans and strays were taken in after the Kyuubi attack when they had lost their family, and had no nation that would take them back in. Bloodline. Koharu muttered under her breath, giving Hamura a significant look. Do you have enemies that would come look for you? Many. Minato answered, smirking at the fact that it was the complete truth again. IWA would probably send out assassination teams the moment his identity became known. Very well. We will trust Hiruzen's judgment on this matter. Hamura said as he glanced at Shikaku. You will allow your son to work with an essentially anonymous member of our village? My son already knows Kira's identity. Shikaku answered. He briefly notified me of his meeting this afternoon and explained the proposal. I also concluded that he knew quite well why Kira-san's identity is kept a secret, but he chose not to confide in me. I trust his judgment on this matter as well. Someone is at the door, Hokage-sama. Minato said suddenly as he sensed his seal's activation like an itch just behind the ear. A Chunin, I believe. Sarutobi nodded at Shikaku, who opened the door to reveal a frazzled-looking man of perhaps 25 with short brown hairs and his hataite wrapped around his head sideways. Hokage-sama. There has been an attack. Sarutobi immediately stood up, face stern. What has occurred? 3 Chunin were killed just south of town, Hokage-sama. They were reported missing from making their patrol rounds an hour ago, and a team of trackers were sent to find out what happened. Any sign of an attacker? One partially burned body of a kunoichi was recovered at the scene. It's being transferred now. There was a hataite that was severely deformed due to the heat, but it appears to be from a wagakure. Very well, Sarutobi said with a nod. I will send a representative immediately. Dismissed. The Chunin quickly backed out of the room, closing the room, which immediately returned to its former status of silence due to Minato's seals. Already? The Hokage muttered, glancing worriedly at Minato. Kiro-san, I believe it will be a good idea for your team, as it is, to report to Ibiki's as soon as the body's recovered. It is probable that an attack so shortly after our weakness has become known may be connected. Yes, Hokage-sama. Minato answered, worriedly considering the possibility that IWA was involved. It brought up the disturbing possibility that the attack had less to do with Kyuubi and more with Naruto's heritage. What do you mean, our weakness? Hamura asked, frowning. You know full well that Uzumaki Naruto's status as a Jinchuriki was not a terribly well-kept secret. It was kept from the youngest generation of our village for his benefit, but practically all civilians had an inkling and spies would have little difficulty in discovering his existence. IWA and other nations have been kept at bay by the knowledge that the strongest of the Biju was within our control. Sarutobi sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. I fear that other nations may step up their attempts to sabotage our village in the wake of the recent assassination. You still believe it was murder then? Koharu wondered. He was discovered with not a scratch on him. Why do you insist on this scenario? Are you seeing the ghosts of foes where there are none? The seal is gone, Kira said, drawing the attention of the council members. The fourth seal was not designed to break with death. It would have killed the fox right alongside the boy. Instead, it is gone. This implies that someone with much knowledge of the Biju and sealing was involved. It is probable that whatever process was used to remove the seal and Kyuubi is responsible for Uzumaki's demise. Jiraiya has gone over the details with me, and is currently researching the possibilities. Sarutobi took over as he noticed Minato's trembling hand. He concurs with Kiru. The Kyuubi was taken. Kemi. Koharu breathed, raising a shaking hand to her mouth. The creature is loose? We don't know, Kiru admitted. It has not been seen as of yet. We don't know if it's sealed away or back to its former state. Until it reappears, we have no way to tell. You mean to find whoever killed the boy and find out what they did with it? Hamura concluded. Such a foe must surely be S-rank to get away with such a thing. Possibly, Sarutobi admitted. That is what our new team will have to find out. Troublesome. Shikaku muttered under his breath, staring at Minato, who fidgeted uncomfortably under the gaze. I will fetch my subordinates and go to the south gate, Minato said finally, glancing at the Hokage, who nodded. I will report in as soon as I discover anything. I will be reviewing several medical nin kunoichi tonight for your consideration, Hokage-sama. Dismissed, Kirakuen? Sarutobi said with a smile. What a drag. Shikamaru drawled as he followed Minato and Kakashi to the south entrance, the two moderating their pace since the genin did not yet know speed techniques. Should I be considering covering up my faces like you two? Seriously, you'd think you two were ugly as sin to hide as much as you do. Minato snickered as Kakashi looked at the genin at his side and tapped him on the head. My cute genin, you have yet to discover the many reasons to cover one's face even when not ugly. It is mysterious, don't you think, Kirasama? How do you put up with this clown? Shikamaru asked, frowning as he noticed a gathering of ninja further along the road. Seems like we're here. Look professional, please. Minato said, coughing under his breath as Kakashi muttered a juvenile remark in response to that. As much as you can, at least, Hataki-sama. One of the Chunin said as the three approached, making the masked shinobi wince. Kakashi, if you will. Kira-san is the leader of this unit. Kakashi rubbed a hand through his wild plume of hair as he gave an irate look at Minato, before purposefully looking away. Minato thought it looked quite convincingly like he couldn't stand him, and tried not to take it too seriously. You'll have to report to him, Kakashi said as he turned away. Kira-sama. The Chunin said, bowing slightly. I didn't know ANBU was already involved in the investigation, my apologies. Report, Chunin. Minato said as he looked over the severely mutilated remains of three Konoha nin who were lined up along the road, just within the village's walls. 3 Chunin discovered a short distance outside the walls, all 3 killed with kunai that were apparently coated in lightning element chakra, which led to almost immediate electrocution. They were also attacked with chakra threads which seemed to be responsible for the majority of burns and superficial wounds. Lightning element, eh? Kakashi opined, still looking away. I suppose they were jonin to take out a few Chunin at once. I understand an attacker was killed? Indeed, the Chunin confirmed as he brought forward a crumpled piece of metal. The rest was sent ahead, but the Hittite was kept here. It's from IWA, Kirasama. I'd gathered that, Minato answered, frowning at the partially molten but unmistakable symbol for Iwagakure. If we assume this was a 3-man unit, 2 more remain at large. Any sign of them? A pair of unidentified shinobi were spotted in the civilian part of the village by ANBU, the Chunin admitted. The link with this attack was made not 10 minutes ago. The news must have reached you fast to get you on the case this quickly. Fortuitous, indeed. Minato answered evasively as he glanced over at Shikamaru. Nara-san, what are the odds of a team of IWA nins sufficiently skilled to make it this close to town to leave their losses so poorly concealed and disposed of? Nil. Shikamaru answered in a bored tone. Either this is a diversion, someone wishes to cast the blame on IWA for spying of their own, or it's a message. Message? The Chunin asked, taking back the Hittite. For whom? For Konoha. Kakashi answered in Shikamaru's stead. Iwa's done this sort of thing before, back before our truce. Send a low-level genin or student along that nobody would miss, and accidentally felling them in enemy territory. Send a message that they're confident enough to expose themselves to possible retaliation and that they can take us. A disturbingly likely scenario, Minato muttered. Given recent events, do they have a Jinchuriki? Shikamaru asked, attracting the attention of his teammates. The Chunin paled at the very mention. Not that I'm aware of, Kakashi said, which was as good as a no given that Jiraiya was his source for such information. Then again, either do we. Minato winced. It seems that our longtime foes in Iwagakure may be considering renewing the old feuds. He looked at the 3 down Chunin. We'll have to step up our patrols and arrange for Jonin accompaniment outside village walls until this blows over. If it blows over, Kakashi muttered darkly. If not, we'd better prepare for war. Someone's taken up the Gamma mask? Right, I'm sure I saw it earlier today, a long-haired Jonin with a piercing in his brow commented. I never thought that toad mask would be worn by anyone again after Hataki's protest. I figured he and Hokage-sama were in agreement on that. I hear the one wearing it is the Hokage's apprentice. A Chunin chimed in. Kakashi listened in with half an ear from the rooftop as below him several Jonin and Chunin gossiped about Minato's appearance, even if they didn't really know who it was. Minato was also on the roof, listening amusedly. It'll be all over town within the day. You think that's a good thing? Kakashi asked, scowling. The only thing we need when Iwa's breathing down our neck is someone picking up the Gamma mask and making a fuss. You know as well as I do that IWA has little to no knowledge of my wearing that mask. At least, it's hardly the thing they focus on in regards to me. He fingered a blonde lock that had escaped from beneath his hood. If it comes to war, they'll have a lot more than my mask to deal with, Minato-sensei, Kakashi muttered, glaring sideways. I mean, Kira-san, what do we do now? You've already gone over the medical need files several times. You've yet to make a decision on a 4th member. We can't afford to wait much longer in pursuing our leads. I wish to have a kunoichi of impeccable skill on the team, Kakashi. You know that between the two of us we'll manage to get all kinds of gruesome wounds. He reached within his vest and retrieved a folded personnel article. I had this one in mind. She's not in town, and hasn't been a Konoha nin for some time, but she's a student of our best. Seriously? Kakashi wondered as he looked over the file. It says here she's been out and about for years. What makes you think she'll consent to come back to Konoha? Besides, this one appears to be busy right now. Our first mission will take us in the direction of IWA, Minato pointed out. We'll come by numerous towns, and it is the direction she was last spotted. It seems a good idea to me. I'll consider it, Kakashi answered grudgingly. Where's our tiny teammate? Shikamaru's using a family sensory technique of his to keep an eye out for any sign of the IWA nin. We'll probably spot them before he does, but that sensory technique's tiring, which will help build up his chakra supply. Minato answered, pointing to the Naruto's obscured form in the shadows of a nearby building. Shikamaru could hear the two arguing. His technique amplified sound emitted near shadows connected to his own when it was active, but he chose not to acknowledge the two. It was difficult enough not to get embarrassed or nervous in front of them as it was. Troublesome. The 3 were holed up near the edge of the shinobi part of town. If the IWA infiltrators were going to sneak in anywhere, it'd likely be here, where they could blend in under the guise of tipsy or drunk shinobi on leave. Shikamaru had been keeping a close eye on any duo of shinobi particularly, though most were simply couples. 2 tall shinobi strode around the corner as if they owned the place, one staggering slightly, not a peculiar sight in this part of town. He forced his mind to check for danger. They were shinobi, sure, but was there anything in particular about them that wait? Suspect spotted, Shikamaru said softly, knowing that the 2 shinobi behind him would hear it. I'm going to check. Shikamaru formed a quick set of hand seals and his shadow sprouted a long sinewy tendril that crawled across the ground jerkily, crossing from shadow to shadow while keeping out of sight and stretching across the plaza. It was edging on his maximum range by the time it arrived at the location of his targets. Shikamaru heard his 2 team members had ceased talking. They were observing his technique. Forcing the chakra to move with an effort of will, the Nara managed to get the shadowy tendril to connect with the closest of the 2 figures, who suddenly froze with his hands still firmly in his pockets, a look of consternation appearing on his face. Cage main complete. Shikamaru jerked his arm to the side, forcing his victim to do the same. If the man was innocent, he'd merely have a rip in his pants where he'd torn out the pocket. If he wasn't, the paralyzed shinobi's companion grasped desperately for the collection of items that clattered to the floor through the large rip that was torn into the pants. Among the fallen objects were a handful of kunai, what appeared to be sealing paper, and a battered Hittite. It was difficult to make out from the distance what symbol was engraved in it, but it was definitely not the leaf symbol of Konoha. Kakashi moved. In an instant he'd passed Shikamaru and half a dozen startled Chunin that were occupying the stretch of road in between the roof and his target. He'd pulled out a kunai along the way and firmly grasped it in hand, his fingers already stretching out to grasp the shinobi by the arm. Shikamaru hadn't heard the Jonin move. One moment he'd been straining to keep up the shadow possession jutsu, then it had quite suddenly broken from the target's end. He glanced up from the Hittite towards the owner of the ninja tools strewn across the street only to find Kakashi already there, the nin unconscious in his arms while he held a kunai with the handle forward in his hand, as it had just been used to firmly knock its victim unconscious. Shikamaru swallowed nervously at the incredibly display of skill as he noticed something was off. Where did the other one go? Shikamaru whispered under his breath as he glanced from side to side, trying to find the escapee, reaching for one of his own kunai. What happened to? I got him. Minato whispered from beside the genin, sending chills down the boy's back as he'd once again missed hearing the approach entirely. The man had put a hand on Shikamaru's hand, halting his reflexive drawing of a weapon. Minato briefly showed an intricate seal drawn on a piece of seal paper that was glowing slightly with chakra. I planted a Horatian seal on the second one. If he believes he's gotten away with escaping, he might contact existing spies that have been entrenched in the village. I placed it under his vest. He shouldn't notice it for some time yet. You people are insane, Shikamaru muttered. He glanced towards where Kakashi had been only to find the white-haired Jonin gone, along with his victim and the Hittite. You're both leagues beyond my skill and I couldn't even follow your insane speed, Minato chuckled lightly as he tapped him on the shoulder. I'm afraid that few people compare when it comes to my speed, so that is an unfair comparison to make. I feel I must point out though, that you missed something important. Tell me, why did you choose to employ your jutsu just now? Shikamaru frowned. There was something off about that shinobi. You told me to keep an eye out for suspicious individuals, correct? Except I saw nothing particularly suspicious about that Nin or his companion. Yet you knew unerringly to go for that man despite letting half a dozen far more sinister-looking people pass by without incident. Minato smiled thinly. It took me years to develop anywhere near that intuition, and it's clear that you have already surpassed me in this. Don't sell your talents short, little genius. Shikamaru tried to avoid blushing, looking away uncomfortably. Troublesome. You say that a lot, eh? Minato answered with a friendly grin, a sad look crossing across his face in an instant. My wife had a tick like that, except she would append nonsense phrases at the end of her sentences from time to time. I never did figure out why. Shikamaru snorted, turning to his team leader. Naruto did too, you know. The genin looked briefly dubious about whether he would continue, and then nodded to himself. He liked to append databeo to whatever he said constantly. For as long as I can remember, in fact. Minato's breath hitched. Really? To think something like that would be genetic. Shikamaru shrugged as Kakashi suddenly appeared next to them in a swirl of leaves, looking collected as always. I have delivered the IWA spy to Ibiki's tender mercies. Took you long enough, Minato said knowingly. You left him intact, right? He is in one piece, yes? Kakashi retorted evasively with a cocky smirk. Where's the other one now? About 2 miles northwards, near the wall, Minato said as he focused chakra into the seal paper he was holding. The seal will hold for about another half hour. If he's going to find a hideout, he'll have to do it soon if we want to find it. You can track Horatian seals? Shikamaru wondered. I thought it was for teleportation. My seals are far more useful than mere self-summoning, Minato answered, pointing out what seemed like a particularly wild squiggle in the mess that was the seal. This here can serve as a tracker. As long as I focus on which particular instantiation of the seal I wish to follow, I have a pretty accurate feel for where it is. Unfortunately, the seals are rather short-lived unless I prepare them beforehand, like on my kunai. You should have given Jiraiya the one working version back, Kakashi pointed out. I mean, if you need him quickly you'll actually have to go find the man. I have other ways of tracking my dear old sensei, Minato said enigmatically. In any case, the IWA spy has holed up in one of the abandoned homes along the north wall that sensei pointed out to me. It doesn't seem like he's going to try and contact any colleagues within our time frame. Until I have my kunai back and I've retrained this newish body in effective sealing via touch, I can't really offer any more. It's not working properly then? Kakashi asked with an eyebrow raised. Most of my techniques work fine, Minato said with a shrug. My chakra control's just worse than it's been in ages. It feels like my chakra's not quite in line with my body. I have my suspicions that unlike the rest of me, the chakra actually did keep on existing during my time as a dead man. That would explain the discrepancy. I'm just not used to an older chakra system, so you've got the chakra that age would bring you with the body of a young Adonis. Kakashi summarized. You have it bad, sensei. Oh, do shut up. Let's catch this IWA bastard and get him to the interrogation department. Minato touched his seal again and nodded. No movement, he's holding up where he is, and he's alone in the room, at least. Hold on to me, please. Kakashi did immediately with Shikamaru following hesitatingly. Are you going to WH? Shikamaru stumbled to the floor as Minato had already pinned down the second IWA Nin, who looked on with startled eyes as his comfortable resting spot on the couch had suddenly been replaced with a dagger in his side. Shikamaru managed to keep upright as he looked around in disorientation. He hadn't even felt the displacement when quite suddenly his surroundings had changed. Another Chunin, Minato observed as he stood up, leaving the unconscious ninja from IWA on the floor. Didn't even set up any defenses, no match for a Konoha Chunin, much less a Jonin. He glanced up and smiled at Shikamaru. You would have probably made mincemeat of him as well. Why would IWA send out Chunin, and how would a 3-man Chunin unit take down one of ours on home turf? Kakashi wondered as he fished the unconscious ninja's Hittite out of his pocket. Haven't even really gone to lengths to hide their allegiance either. This is troubling. Shikamaru observed as he read a short note that had fallen out of the Iwanin's pocket alongside his headband. Orders, spying, as expected. What's troubling about it? It says it's for Roku. He muttered darkly. 6. Why would his codename be Sixth if it was only a 3-man team? He's a decoy. Minato answered as he frowned. I bet it'll turn out neither of the ones we caught know anything about Iwa's movements at all. Meanwhile, actual Jonin-level infiltrators will do as they please. 3 foreign Jonin, already in the village under our very noses, Kakashi noted. We'll have to inform the Hokage. He's got to up security. This is rather convenient, Kakashi. Minato said worriedly. IWA sending a double infiltration unit within what's likely days since they heard the news about the Kyuubi. I'm starting to believe that IWA might really have had a hand in setting up what happened. Why would they try to pick a fight with us? Kakashi wondered. We're hardly the weakest on the block even without a Jinchuriki to fall back on, and Iwa's hardly the strongest nation. That's what frightens me, Kakashi. Minato answered. They wouldn't do this, unless they were pretty confident. Perhaps they've gone and allied with another nation without our knowledge. They might be gearing up for another big war. Shikamaru frowned at the unconscious Chunin, quickly bending down to search his pockets. Beyond a few meager supplies, there was nothing. This one didn't come prepared for any lengthy stay. He must have been told to get in and out with some information. The fact that we captured this team will leak out within a day or two, when they don't report. It's probably what they expected, Minato commented. What's the most likely occasion for a major strike in the near future? Probably the Chunin exams in a few months, Kakashi said. Foreign groups will already be in Konoha, and it's quite possibly that IWA will sneak in their allies, even if we forbid their nation from attending entirely. He turned to the Chunin and rubbed his chin in contemplation. Considering 1 or 2 entirely new hidden villages are reportedly sending teams, security will be concentrated on the exams. We'll be spread thin to counter any attacks. Canceling the exams is out of the question, I take it. Shikamaru noted, unsurprised. Could we arrange for Suna to supply security troops? Suna and Konoha have a lukewarm relationship at best. The Hokage would never dare rely on that, Kakashi said. We'll need to set up elite troops to guard the village in case of an attack. Cut off the head as quickly as possible. Minato turned to Kakashi and they shared an unspoken conversation. Shikamaru sighed in annoyance. Seriously? It'll have to be us, yes. Minato answered sheepishly. Between Kakashi and myself we have the firepower covered, and a couple of months should also get you strong enough to defend yourself, under my tutelage. We could use your planning in setting up a defense during the exams as well. We'll need to find a 4th member soon, then we can set out, combining our main mission with extended training. This is going to be a lot of work, isn't it? Shikamaru said under his breath. What a drag. I wonder if Guy would be willing to tutor in taijutsu? Neither Jonin reacted to Shikamaru's horrified grimace. Hiruzen, can we talk? Of course, my old friend. Sarutobi responded, surprised. What can I do for you, Hamura? I want to know what is going on with this Kiru. Hamura retorted, sitting down gingerly across from his old teammate. You might have pulled the wool over Koharu's eyes for a moment, but she's suspicious. You didn't think I of all people would actually buy that you picked a new apprentice, did you? The Sandaime sighed, lighting his pipe as he walked to the windows and looked out over his town. It's a useful cover. In some ways it's not far from the truth. It's a cover then. For whom? Hamura asked, frowning. I know you haven't recalled some of the most volatile individuals that would need protection. Danzo would have been talking about it constantly. What are you cooking up? The Sandaime didn't say anything for a while, then finally sighed. His identity must remain a secret for now. I can't really go into why. It's important. You'll have to trust me on this. What trust could you have in this person that you would go to these lengths to cover for him? Giving him that mask, you'd only do that for the people you think most important. Hamura wondered. How strong is your confidence regarding this man's loyalties? Absolute. The third answered without thinking about it. He looked down at his pipe in contemplation. It is my wish that he should be my successor. Hamura gasped, standing up and walking to his old friend, seeking confirmation of what he'd heard in the Hokage's expression. Such trust, I have only ever seen you give it to a few people. I can't imagine what this man did to gain it, but if you say it is so, the two briefly stood together as the team members they once were, under their sensei, who would become the Nidaime Hokage. Very well. The Hokage didn't respond as Hamura finally walked to the door, his footsteps the only sound in the office. I doubt many would appreciate an unknown to take the Hokage's headpiece, but your word would hold a lot of weight in the considerations. I'll trust your judgment on this. The last time you had such conviction about someone, Hamura smiled. So be it, Hiruzen, I'll leave Kyuubi. When you see fit to reveal his identity, I'll stand behind you. Hamura left the Hokage's office, the Sandaime continuing to stare out the window with a tear in the corner of his eye. Koharu was already there with a curious expression. Well? Hamura stared at his hands for a moment, glancing back at the closed door to the Hokage's office. I don't know why, but Hiruzen's convinced of his loyalty. More than that of most people, even. I think we should trust him on his word this once. But Danzo is Danzo. Hamura answered. He may have a better view when it comes to military affairs, but he has never had the insight into a person that Hiruzen does, has he? Tobirama-sensei did comment on that often. Koharu looked conflicted. You would side us with Hiruzen on this? Danzo will be infuriated when an elite shinobi team is led by an unknown, and none of us will report on the man. He may choose to ignore us entirely after this. Hamura sighed, a forlorn look appearing in his eyes. Hamura turned to his longtime partner. The way Hiruzen spoke about this man, it has been years since I have seen that expression, Koharu. It looked like he sniffed. He looked like he did when he passed on that hat. Ah. Koharu answered after a moment, indecision vanishing, a determined glint appearing in her eyes. Well, then it seems that Team Tobirama will stand fast on this. The two shared a sad smile. Neither knew about it, but their third teammate looked on fondly from his office, a glassy sphere in his hand and tears in his eyes. Ibiki's place remained, well, creepy. Konoha's torture and interrogation force regularly did the most horrific things imaginable to get information out of captured enemies, and the stench of loose bowels never quite seemed to leave the place. Kakashi was long used to awful smells, though. He glanced towards the morgue section, where a blonde tuft of hair remained visible on one of the slabs. It had been a good idea for Minato to skip this particular appointment. What did you find out? Kakashi asked as he spotted Marino Ibiki, who had been leaning against the wall in the corner, looking on interestedly from the shadows. It was unnerving, Kakashi thought, that Ibiki was one of the only people in town who could still easily evade his perception like that. One was useless. Ibiki muttered as he stepped forward. Broke before we'd even done anything, but all he would talk about was nonsense about tests. It seems he was led to believe that infiltrating Konoha would look real good on his resume. Decoy, then? Kakashi observed, nodding. The other one? The second one you brought in wasn't quite right in the head, as far as I can figure. Ibiki answered, rubbing a hand across his scarred face. He took longer to say anything, but he kept going on about ghosts and ghouls. Seemed to believe that you were the Yondaime returned for one. What did you do to the sod? Kakashi laughed nervously, forcing himself to ignore the shiver that threatened to break free. It is not so surprising, I think. Minato-sensei had a certain reputation, especially in IWA. In any case, once he was through with spouting bull, he got to the meat. Seems that he was the only actual chunin on his team, the others being technically genin. They were part of a group of 6, as Kira-san reported. Ibiki motioned to the morgue. The chunin didn't make it, but we have enough to have pretty good guesses as to the identity of the 3 missing shinobi. You've already informed the Sandaime, I imagine. My report has been on his desk since 6 this morning, Ibiki supplied. Sandaime seems to share your concern regarding the urgency of this matter. I imagine the rest of US will hear what's going on in a timely manner? Kakashi smiled thinly. Hopefully, this is an isolated incident. I'll try to get you one of those juicier targets so that we can put this behind us. Hopefully, Ibiki said with a snort. Seems I might have to consider hiring a new assistant or two, if this is going where I think it's going. Haven't seen the Hokage worry about interrogation reports since. Kakashi nodded at his scarred colleague, giving a short wave. I'll have to go find my team leader. It's strange having one again, I can imagine. Ibiki answered, cracking his fingers and smiling sadistically. You managed to miss out on genin teams again, I actually volunteered as a sensei once, but I was rejected. I wonder why that is? Kakashi sighed exasperatedly as he turned. By the way, Ibiki-san, there's something in your hair. Again? Man, these IWA folk can never keep their insides where they belong. Sandaime Hokage smiled as he saw his successor enter the office. The man carried himself with a confidence he'd missed in previous meetings, and the steely blue eyes behind the frog-painted mask were sharp. It seemed that recent events, however troubling, were doing a good job at getting Minato involved again, renewing attachments to the village that had withered. I've already read your report, Kira-san, Sarutobi said as he waved to his seat. 2 ANBU operatives were nearby, and as such secrecy had best be maintained. I see your concerns and I acknowledge that your plan is a well-considered one, with some caveats. Minato nodded, the midday sun glinting off his mask as he took the opportunity to glimpse outside. He could see Shikamaru waiting down in the plaza, shadowy tendrils vanishing under benches and tree roots. He briefly felt elated that the Nara was actually doing the training assignment he'd suggested. What in particular, Hokage-sama? Although I have every confidence that you will be effective when the time comes, your plan involves leaving the village for perhaps a period of weeks. We'd be missing out on 2 high-level jonin, and one of our most promising genin will be out in the field on an A-class mission before he's even done a C-class. Sarutobi paused as he glanced over the report again. Torture and interrogation reports that there are likely 3 high-profile targets in Konoha itself, including a kunoichi that has escaped our grasp multiple times in the past. We can't stick around Konoha just in case they might try something, Minato said. If we wait too long, any leads we might find will be too cold to be of any use. We're hardly the only people in Konoha that can defend it, but we're the only ones assigned to this task. I suppose you're right, Kirakuen, the third said after a moment. I understand you're going to try and find a 4th member for your team while outside Konoha? Do you think it's wise to include outsiders? You gave me free rein, old man. Minato snickered at the third's stricken look. Trust me, I have my reasons. Oh, I trust you, whippersnapper. Sarutobi answered with a glower. Just make sure you don't take too long and make your way back in time for us to discuss strategy. With all this rumbling going on, I worry that something unexpected will catch us all by surprise while we're distracted. We are merely seeking for information, Hiruzen. We're not going for assassination, not yet anyway. We're slated to leave later tonight. After, well, the funeral. Minato nodded silently, shivering imperceptibly. He'd known that Naruto's burial was coming, but given the circumstances he couldn't really attend it as he would have. Nobody would begrudge a grieving parent breaking down, but nobody knew he was such. He had at least arranged to join Sarutobi there, or he would not have been allowed at all. Thinking too much on the topic of his son's demise clouded his judgment. Minato had found, for once, he didn't really mind. Irrational rage fought its way to the forefront whenever he did, though he didn't quite know how to express it. Blowing things up would probably be effective, but only for a little while. Kakashi had tried to talk about it, but it was clear that the man was barely more rational on the issue than he was, if the steely glint of vengeance he saw whenever the topic came up was anything to go by. It was somewhat ironic that it was the genin of the team that turned out to be the stable element. The boy had picked up on the tension immediately, particularly since he knew who Kira really was, and had on several occasions delivered pointed comments on how troublesome they were being. The boy hadn't even asked about Minato's resurrection. He'd rightly guessed it was a classified secret of the village, though Minato figured he'd get around to telling eventually, when he knew himself what happened. He's talked at length with the young Nara about what he should do regarding the funeral. He'd briefly considered not going at all, since he didn't know if he could bear acting as if unaffected in such an environment. Shikamaru was apparently under the impression that the funeral would allow for some degree of closure, and that he should be there, and Minato had finally agreed. The genin was wrong, of course. The only thing that could serve as closure to this nightmarish part of his life would be the drawn-out death of the murderer for the crimes he committed. Ryo, for your thoughts? Minato glanced up at the Hokage and grimaced under his mask. Just worried about the funeral, I suppose. I don't do well in crowds. Well, he did, but the third would understand. It's a small gathering, you don't have to worry. Sarutobi smiled sadly. Few adults are coming, it'll mostly be genin. Quite a few haven't ever had a close loss like this before. You'll be there in case any of them need help, right? Minato nodded, unable to speak. He briefly remembered that moment with Kushina, where he'd first seen his son, a little tyke. He'd been wondering what would have happened if the events of the Kyuubi attack had passed them by. Sarutobi put a hand on his successor's shoulder and nodded. I knew I could count on you, Kira-san. I've always known that. With the funeral being set up and several high-profile jonin attending, now was the ideal time for the heist. Security was lower than it would be for days. Cloaked in dark blue that unveiled only his eyes, the shinobi managed to quite deftly evade detection by the 3 guards that regularly walked the halls of Konoha's museum. Few of the displays were genuine, of course. In a village of ninja, it was really not a great idea to put expensive things on display, but there were things to be stolen here. The shinobi edged around the corner, sticking to the wall gingerly with a little chakra, evading any pressure-sensitive switches that might be on the floor. 2 times he had to jump across seals embedded in the floor or walls that would have probably killed him if he'd activated them. The museum was quiet. The guards were ninja themselves and trained to remain inconspicuous so that any activity might raise an alarm. The infiltrator was way too good to actually let himself be heard. Here we are, he thought, approaching one of several vaults in the basement of the museum, used to keep originals of many of the items that were visible as replicas above. Thankfully, he'd arranged to have the code before he even came here, and he carefully wrenched open the first. The door barely made a whisper, much to the shinobi's relief. After a short inspection he moved on, closing the first. It snapped into the lock instantly. He quickly made his way to the second and opened it as well. It took until the 4th vault and one curious guard visit later to finally hit the gold mine. Carefully the dark-clad figure stepped into the vault, pulling it closed behind him. This was the oldest vault, it seemed. Dust had accumulated, and judging from the stale air it hadn't been open in years. Good. He pulled off his hood and inhaled deeply, trying to ignore the dry surroundings. Why did I ever volunteer for this? Kakashi really hadn't expected robbing museums as a skill before. Hope this works. Kakashi muttered as he pulled out a pack of sealing cards. You'd better thank me for this later, sensei. The sealing cards were quickly placed on all 4 sides of a rather sizable crate. They glowed briefly with chakra, and Kakashi nodded. Right, now I should. The moment he pushed chakra into the master seal he was holding, he found himself at home listening to a cacophony of crashing and breaking. He blinked and cursed as realized that the crate he just transported along had neatly crushed most of the possessions in his living room, including several copies of Jiraiya's novels that he'd left behind when he left to recover his prize. Minato smiled as he entered the room, eyes shining merrily. Well, I never did say exactly where you'd be arriving, did I, sensei? Thanks, Kakashi. Minato said seriously as he opened the crate and whistled appreciatively at the rows and rows of trichinae, undoubtedly his old design, recovered from what remained of the old hideout. They didn't have any seals on them, not after so many years, but that could be remedied easily enough. I knew you could do it. You thought I'd get caught. Kakashi accused. The only reason you sent me was because I can use the Sharingan and get away with that. Minato shrugged, picking 3 of the kunai from the crate and inspecting them. These are in excellent condition, if a bit dirty. Must be hundreds here, too. Quite a nice haul, I think. Why didn't you just ask the Hokage? Who do you think greenlit this little mission? Minato smirked as he tapped the box. It couldn't have been done in daylight anyway, given that anyone who went around taking my old kunai would be under suspicion immediately, even under the Hokage's orders. It's easier to explain away some lost items from a decade ago instead of the Hokage actually giving out what are pretty much historical artifacts. Not for much longer, I take it. Kakashi commented dryly. If I ever need to cut loose, I need these, Kakashi. Minato's gaze darkened. I have a feeling that'll happen sooner than we'd like. Kakashi agreed morosely, a troubled look appearing briefly on his face. How are we going to take these along anyway? Let me recount to you the wonders of the sealing arts, Minato said with an exaggerated flourish, reminiscent of Jiraiya. You see, there's this invention called a— I get it, Kakashi answered in exasperation. We have to get going, sensei. Alright. Minato gulped. He managed to distract himself from thinking about it all day, but now it was looming really close. His son's funeral. You'll be leaving tonight then? Shikamaru didn't look up from the board, concentrating on the shogi pieces. He managed to stretch out the game they'd set aside last time beyond 3 turns, but it looked hopeless. I'll be out of town for only a few weeks, stop worrying. A-class missions aren't your usual genin fare, Shikaku observed. I can't help but worry, you're awfully talkative tonight. Shikamaru answered as he moved a piece on the board and stretched. You seemed rather happy with the interest the Hokage and others showed in my progress. Why the hesitation now? Shikaku sighed, looking at his son seriously. It's that Kira, I'm not sure why, but I get the willies when I'm near him. Feels like I've seen a ghost or something. Troublesome. It must be that mask. The young Nara raised an eyebrow. You let your feelings cloud your rational judgment? Who are you and what have you done to my father? Shikaku laughed. I suppose your mother has rubbed off on me some. Troublesome woman. Shikamaru shook his head in exasperation. You're so whipped. Shikaku sighed deeply, suddenly looking stricken as he stared at the shogi board. How you? I win. Shikamaru said with a wide smile. You shouldn't distract yourself, you know. Shikamaru smugly pushed aside his father's pieces. I suppose I have been a little on edge. I've been hearing disturbing rumors and the council meeting I attended did nothing to lessen that. Shikaku pondered briefly as he gazed at the shogi board. It can be troublesome to be Jonin commander sometimes. I'm on a team of people that were trained by Kage, Shikamaru pointed out. I'm sure you never had to deal with that kind of thing. Trouble is they seem to think I'm as much a genius as they are. I'll actually have to go train. Such a hard life you lead, Shikaku answered with a smirk. I knew Hitaki had something up his sleeve. I miscalculated what it was, though. I should concentrate on figuring out that Kira guy. Don't. Shikamaru said shortly as he stood up. I've told you before, the Hokage's got a good reason to keep my team leader anonymous. If you do find out, keep it silent. Don't tell anyone. Shikaku blinked at his son's ferocity when he said those words. Alright, I'll be discreet. The young Nara snorted as he stretched out, getting used to his new attire. He was wearing a new jacket reminiscent of a Chunin flak jacket, though until he got promoted he wouldn't get a real one. It's almost time. We have to get to the ceremony. Shikaku nodded, looking towards the Hokage monument in the gloom of early night. The stars had already come out and a shooting star flashed across the heads. He paused briefly on the 4th face, grimacing. He muttered softly under his breath as he gazed at that stone face. I'm sorry that we'll have to bury him so early, Hokage-sama. I hope he at least feels happy, reunited with his family. Shikamaru looked on sadly behind his father, feeling suddenly much older than he really was. The dreary drizzle that soaked the town was depressing enough on its own, Kakashi considered, even if there weren't a funeral. It was even worse considering the funeral was for a child. Shikamaru had arrived minutes earlier, wearing a formal black suit that looked identical to Shikaku's. The older Nara had joined his wife, nodding briefly at Kakashi, who hadn't responded. Kakashi, like Minato, had their black shinobi clothes on, since they didn't have any formal wear. There were a lot of people congregated around the coffin, all things considered, a large number of children, mostly classmates from the last year, all dressed in various black attires. Choji and Ino had arrived first, briefly greeting Shikamaru before joining their respective parents. They were quickly followed by an unusually morose team guy as well as Yuhikurinai's team. Most of the children from shinobi parents seemed to have at least one guardian present. Minato hadn't come yet. The man had argued repeatedly that it would be odd for a stranger to arrive early, but Kakashi realized full well that he was simply trying to delay the inevitable. He supposed that he'd appear as soon as the proceedings started. Shikamaru had positioned himself to his side, leaving room for one. Some of the people present surprised Kakashi. Uchiha Sasuke was present, slouching against a tree that flanked the coffin, looking away as if uninterested. The odd glint in the boy's eyes chilled Kakashi. It was awfully familiar, as he thought back to his own days on Minato's team, when he'd seen loss. What kind of relationship had the Uchiha and Naruto had? There were a few civilians, an older man that Kakashi recognized as the owner of the Ichiraku ramen shop for one. Mariboshi Kosuka, the so-called Eternal Genin, was present as well, looking particularly glum. Lastly, of course, there were the third Hokage and his son, along with the other Jonin sensei of this generation. Kakashi shivered as he realized he would have been one of them had the last week or two not happened. "You saved me a seat," a slightly trembling voice said beside him. Minato had approached silently, slipping in between Kakashi and Shikamaru on one of the hindmost benches that had been dragged over earlier in the day. Some elected to stand. Minato's disguise as Kiru was complete. Although his face was covered by the frog mask and hood, Kakashi had no trouble determining that the man was a veritable wreck. In the middle of the small crowd was the black coffin. It was closed and covered in a tarp now. A small photo of an enthusiastically smiling Naruto perched on top its lid, the boy's face entirely covered in paint. The result of one of the boy's many pranks, no doubt. Besides the coffin was a pile of flowers, the more elaborate clearly creations of the Yamanaka family. The third Hokage stepped behind the coffin, putting his hand tenderly on it. He seemed to want to say something, but no word came out. After a moment, he gestured. Yumino Irika, academy instructor, came forward first, relating a few tales on the pranking exploits of the young boy as Kakashi shuddered, turning away and closing his eye. The ceremony, it had been years since he'd last been to one voluntarily, preferring to say his goodbyes alone. He realized now why he always chose such. Unwelcome memories bubbled up beyond his control. History was repeating itself, Kakashi realized. Obito had been young too, a shinobi still in the early days of his career, his life cut short thought no fault of his own. That funeral had been a nightmare. He hadn't been able to keep his cool for any length of time after the ceremony had ended, and spent most of the night being comforted by Rin, who was perhaps the person that seemed to handle the loss best. Of course, that was before Rin. Kakashi trembled, all his confident composure dropping away in an instant. He slumped, incapable of hearing what Irika said through the sound of the blood throbbing in his ears. His hand was clutched painfully tightly around Minato's arm, though the man didn't react. Kakashi fought to get control over himself. This wasn't the time or place for any of this. There'd been plenty of time to consider these things before. Now there was this. He'd accepted that he was the only one left of his team. He'd promised himself to keep an eye on his sensei's legacy, the only real part of that little family that was left. Naruto had been a little ray of sunshine in an otherwise dreary existence. He'd asked specifically for guard duty over the young child while he was in ANBU, just so that he could personally make sure that the boy could grow up in relative safety. He'd thought often of approaching him and telling him everything, but was held back by his promises to keep such things until Naruto was ready. That'd never be the case. He'd failed sensei. They hadn't fought about it yet, but Kakashi was convinced that sooner or later the recriminations would begin. Worse, though he'd failed Naruto. Somehow that felt worse than any of the rest of it. He should have been teaching the kid how to walk on trees, run on water if he had the aptitude for it, some of his old man's jutsus. Instead, Kakashi forced himself to breathe, finding that it had gotten rather difficult. Shikamaru sent a worried glance his way, though the boy seemed more focused on Minato, who seemed determined to keep his cool. Kakashi focused on the picture perched atop the coffin, forcing himself to step away from the chasm of emotions that attending yet another child funeral had opened up. Someone else was speaking now, a woman. Kakashi didn't recognize her. Before he knew it, Ichiraka said a word or two, though he wouldn't know what. He could perhaps have said a bit himself, if he'd had the composure, or if the person he'd tell such things to wasn't sitting right beside him. At that thought, he turned away, his eye burning slightly from the intense stare he maintained for minutes on end, or perhaps tears. "We'll get the bastards that did this," he growled, eyes gleaming dangerously. "I promise you I'll do whatever it takes." Minato didn't answer, looking straight at the third Hokage who was now standing before the coffin, his eyes closed as if in prayer as he reached for the picture. "Naruto and I had a special connection," the Hokage began, smiling sadly at the photo. "Shortly after he lost his parents in the Kyuubi attack, I arranged for him to be taken care of in a local orphanage. I felt it was the least I could do. That orphanage turned out to be unsatisfactory." The Hokage turned to Kakashi, regret plainly visible on his face. "Not all in this village treated Naruto like they should have, but some did. I kept an eye on him over the years, just to see if he would be alright, out on his own." The Hokage smiled fondly. "He was after my hat for as long as I can remember. He believed that by becoming Hokage he could win the favor of the village, and protect those he cherished most, many of whom are among us now." Minato let out a slight choking noise. Kakashi put a hand on his shoulder carefully, focusing on the third. Tears dripped down from the inside of his mask, though in the dreary rain, Kakashi doubted anyone would notice. "Just shortly before his untimely demise, I granted Naruto the status of genin," the third continued. "He'd been trying for years to pass. He always got stuck on the clone technique. It was, it turns out, an artifact of his unusually high chakra reserves. Really, he's been ready to graduate for years." Kakashi couldn't help but think back to his own early days. He'd graduated at a very early age himself. He was considered a prodigy. What would have happened if Naruto had passed the first time? Would it have made a difference? Like Kakashi himself, he was the son of a legendary ninja. Perhaps he'd have made Hokage. Naruto was a shinobi of Konoha, even if it was for only a little while, before he joined his parents in the pure world. In recognition of his life's dream, I will always consider Uzumaki Naruto an honorary Hokage, and that is how I shall remember him. His name stands proudly among his brethren on the memorial stone of Konoha. The third bowed, and many followed his example. Uchiha Sasuke closed his eyes, unshed tears poorly hidden. Goodbye, Uzumaki Naruto. May we meet again, someday, in a better world. He felt Minato freeze beside him, and glanced over immediately, noting a somber Shikamaru looking right back at him. Minato was completely immobile, under the influence of the shadow possession jutsu. Kakashi didn't need to see Minato's face to know that Shikamaru was all that stood between the former Kage's collected facade and complete hysteria. Kakashi didn't react visibly to people leaving. Most of the students left silently with their parents, the civilians and Kosuke shuffling off quietly as well. The third remained at the coffin, staring at it silently with tears clear in his eyes. Finally, they were alone. Shikamaru relaxed his jutsu, breathing hard as he did so, almost collapsing from the effort. Minato crumpled like a puppet with the strings cut. Sensei, I'll live. Minato mumbled as he forced himself to sit, throwing the mask off his face and tracking a hand through his hair. His face was tear-streaked and pale, his hands were shivering. That was, Kakashi nodded to the unspoken sentiment. Shikamaru, you did well. The Nara didn't respond, looking over at the Sandaime Hokage who looked on with deep sadness reflected in his eyes. The Sandaime spoke softly. I'm sorry that we couldn't tell everything, that I couldn't. No, at least that I'll make sure people know of Naruto's real heritage when you return to us in full. Minato agreed silently, stumbling over to the coffin carefully. Kakashi looking around nervously for onlookers, but he couldn't even sense anyone nearby, they'd all left. Minato picked up the picture that the Sandaime had held, tracing the features of his son with a trembling finger. I will take this. The Hokage didn't say anything, merely stepped nearer and put an arm around his successor's shoulders. My boy, it's your right. I will keep an eye on things here, make sure everything is right. While you go do what you must. Minato nodded at the third, suddenly spotting a new arrival, appearing almost out of nowhere. Halfway up the hill, shadowed partially by the trees and looking forlornly down at a little stream of water running downhill, was Jiraiya. You came. Of course I came. Jiraiya answered, his voice barely a whisper. Packing was a subdued affair. Shikaka merely looked on as his son gathered kunai, packed food for the road and put his Fortunen vest back on. He'd already arranged for the adult team members to take care of all the big important stuff, so a few luxuries here and there were fine. He managed to shove a travel edition of Shogi in. Perhaps he'd have a chance of playing his team members along the way. You're really going out then? Yes, Dad. I figured you'd understood that by now. Shikamaru answered as he plopped down on the floor across from his father, rolling his eyes. Stop fussing, I'll be fine. It's not as if I'm a complete dimwit, you know, and I have some of the strongest shinobi of Konoha at my back. Where's Mom anyway? I should say goodbye. How should I know where that woman is? Shikaka said with a shrug as he picked up one of the rolls of storage seals that his son was using to take all his important possessions along. Someplace uninteresting, I imagine. I'm just in here, inconsiderate oaf. Nara Yoshino said as she stomped into the room with an annoyed expression, a few strands of hair escaping her tight bun of hair that made her look awfully like a schoolteacher. She glanced at Shikamaru oddly, noting the kunai on his hip and the new jacket. Where are you off to? You didn't tell her then. Shikamaru concluded. That's most troublesome. Our son's been recruited by the Hokage, Shikaka drawled. I would have told you a couple days ago, but well, things happened. I didn't get around to it. What do you mean recruited? Yoshino said, glaring at the two Nara men. Aren't you on a team with Ino and Choji, Shikamaru? I could have sworn Yamanaka-san told me that. Technically I was. Shikamaru volunteered, cringing internally at his mother's look. After the unpleasantness of last week, Hataki-san took an interest. Our son's on his team now, Shikaka added helpfully, leaving out that Kakashi wasn't the leader. One prodigy to another, you know how it goes. It's troublesome business. I didn't think you'd be interested. Why on earth did you keep that from me? Yoshino demanded, turning to her husband, eyes blazing. Well? What's so special about this Hataki character and his little team? Well, Shikaka sighed, looking decidedly uncomfortable. Go, son. I'll explain. Shikamaru took the offer to get the hell out with both hands, quickly fetching his last belongings off the ground and heading for the door. He hadn't quite moved out of earshot when his mother's piercing voice made him wince. A class? Shikamaru winced in sympathy at the telltale sound of his dad's shogi set crashing to floor. It was hardly the first time. Of course, it'd be worse if he stuck around. They'd inevitably tire from the dispute and make up, and Shikamaru really didn't want to imagine what that involved. That's 12, Minato said softly, wrapping a long seal tag around the hilt of the steel kunai several times, sealing it with resin. This should be enough for now. until I get some real time to get things back to their old standards. I take it you'll stash one with both me and Shikamaru. Kakashi observed as he took one of the Hiraishin kunai. He could feel the slight bit of chakra in the seal heat and cool softly as he touched it. Will they last? These are on proper seal paper, they should last up to a month. I'll need to make my old ink again to get back to semi-permanent ones. It should do for the duration of this mission, though. Minato frowned at the 12th seal he made. They're not quite as stable as I remember, but they're well within the limits. I suppose it'll take a few weeks before I can get the chance to test out if it's just my chakra control that's getting in my way, Sensei Kakashi said slowly. You threw yourself on these things the moment you got back. Are you sure you're okay? I can deal, Kakashi, Minato answered, though his voice wasn't so strong anymore. I had to be there. You must understand, Kakashi nodded. A part of me wishes I never went to that funeral. He scratched his eye tiredly. I'm not sure which funeral I mean either. Either works for your point, I suppose. You must then realize why I threw myself at these. Minato continued as he tapped his kunai. They're a part of me, in a way. Without my Hiraishin, I can't go all out on the battlefield. The enemy we're chasing. You need that option, Kakashi realized. You'd never forgive yourself if you didn't do everything in your power, as sensei? I doubt I'm alone in that viewpoint, Kakashi. I must point out that you personally argued I should take on Shikamaru's sensei role, despite the fact that you could do it too, and you'd been already slated for the job. What was the real reason you argued for me instead of yourself? Minato looked at his student sadly. I can guess, I suppose. Kakashi didn't answer for a moment, then relented. You're right. I don't want the burden of having to protect Genin on my plate when this is going on. I used to be an Anbu. I know how to cut loose all the way to take down an enemy, but I can't do that as a sensei. You might, but I cannot take another responsibility now. Better be wary of falling too deeply into anger and despair, Kakashi-kun. Minato said worriedly. It's not a pretty path. Just be careful. Kakashi nodded, slipping the Hiraishin kunai into his flak jacket. He smiled fondly at the seal. I'm not the Uchiha, you know, just part of you, Minato teased, and they call me the kid. Shikamaru observed from the doorway as the two jonin traded playful barbs, either putting up much of a fight. What a drag. It was a strange sight that greeted Izumo as he yawned loudly while lounging at the gate. Kamizuki Izumo was standing guard, not his usual type of D rank, but he wasn't feeling particularly fit and had accepted the Hokage's offer in taking the job, along with his longtime sparring partner Kotetsu. It had been strange that the option was even there. The jonin usually stationed here had been recalled for no explained reason. What had Izumo confused was the fact that Hatake Kakashi was coming up the road to the town gate, followed closely by a young nin that seemed to be from the Nara family if his hairstyle was anything to go by. In front of both of them strode a shinobi with an Anbu mask, cloaked entirely in black. He pushed his shoulder-length hair out of his eyes to take a better look. You're going out, Hatake-sama? At this hour? He asked, noting the battle-ready state of all three shinobi. Izumo raised an eyebrow as Kakashi sighed, who nodded to the masked ninja, glaring as he did so. This, Kira-san's the team leader? The Nara boy groaned as he muttered under his breath about getting over it. We are leaving for an A-class assignment. The Hokage's fully aware of our departure, Minato said, noting amusedly that he remembered the Chunin from his academy days. If you need verification, feel free to contact him. Oh, no problem, Anbu, Kira-sama, Izumo stuttered. Hey, Kotetsu, what? Exclaimed a voice from a tree bordering the gate, and a disgruntled face popped out from between a few branches, framed by spiky black hair. The man blinked owlishly and rubbed a bandage that crossed his nose. Ah, Kira-sama, I heard you were gonna pass by tonight. You did? Izumo asked, and then flushed. You're supposed to tell such things to me, idiot. Kakashi sighed as Shikamaru muttered about being more mature than people twice his age. Minato ignored the two and stepped away from the gate. Either of the Chunin stopped him, and after a moment Kakashi and Shikamaru followed in his wake, glancing curiously at the gate guards they left behind. Minato turned to them a last time. We're due back in a few weeks. Keep an eye out, will you, Izumo-kun, Kotetsu-kun? Why, yes, sir. Izumo answered, confused. Minato gave a slight bow before turning away. Izumo finally moved to his colleague when the odd trio had walked out of sight. Did you hear that? Did he just call us? Who cares? I'll be over at the trees someplace. Call me if you need me. Come back here, you slacker. Minato, Kakashi, and Shikamaru managed to cover quite a lot of ground before the next morning. Occasionally Shikamaru would hitch a ride with Kakashi, as he was the only one among the three that wasn't proficient in speed techniques. I remember coming through the city of Otafukagai when I first woke up. I recall asking for a map. That's the earliest I've managed to recollect, pretty much. A few glimpses more, that's all. Minato grimaced. I just walked right into town. Anyone could have recognized me. I suppose I should be thankful I was a dirty wreck. You managed a pretty decent travel time for traveling without chakra, Kakashi acknowledged, glancing down the plains of the Land of Fire. A few days, a week at most, if we assume that events in Konoha and out here were linked. Do you recall which direction you were heading before you arrived in town? Shikamaru questioned. We're about 2 hours from the city. If you came from this side, we might not even need to go in. Hold on a minute, Kakashi muttered. Let me try something. Kakashi went through hand seals at a rate Shikamaru couldn't quite keep up with. Kuchios no Jutsu. Kakashi slapped his hand to the floor, and in a cloud of smoke, Pakken, Kakashi's smallest Niken summon, greeted them with a raised paw. How's it going? I didn't think of summons since toads don't specialize in tracking, Minato muttered distractedly, frowning slightly. You think you could track my scent this long after I've been here? You weren't trying to cover your tracks, sensei, Kakashi pointed out. Besides, my Niken are great. Pakken's got an incredibly precise sense of smell. Pakken sighed softly, glancing at his master with what could be pity. I can defend myself, you know. The diminutive dog turned to the other 2 members of the team. Nice to meet you. Likewise, Shikamaru murmured. You are the first talking dog I have met, I must admit. Ha, I'm not just some street dog who learned to talk, you know. Pakken argued. I'm a ninja dog. Don't underestimate me either. The little dog patted himself on the shoulder, bowing to show off the Konoha Hittite on top of his head. Kakashi rolled his eye and smiled at Pakken in amusement. We need your tracking skills. You see this guy here? We're trying to track where he's been. The tracks will be old, about 2 weeks, but he was in no state to erase them. Easy, the small dog said haughtily. I already smell it now, 100 meters or so north and headed from northeast to southwest. Give or take 11 days old, I'd say. The directions of Konoha and Otafukagai, Shikamaru observed. Given that we know the endpoint was our village, we'll have to follow it down there to the city, see where it came from. Minato nodded, glancing at Pakken. Can you check if anyone else was on the same path at that time? I could have been followed. I wouldn't know. I wasn't paying attention at the time. Nobody right at the same time, Pakken said after a moment. A couple people a day before, though. One of them I recognized, though I'm not sure who. It must have been a while since I smelled it. Probably just a ninja or 2 returning to the village, though. Hold on tight, Shikamaru-kun, Kakashi said with a grin as the Nara was about to trudge in the direction Pakken had pointed. No need to walk slowly all the way to the city. Shikamaru nodded, offering his arm to Pakken. Hop on, it'll be quicker. Who do you think I am? Pakken responded with a friendly smile. I can outpace Kakashi. Remember, I'm no ordinary dog. You're a ninja dog, I get it. Kakashi muttered under his breath. The only thought running through Shikamaru's mind as the surroundings suddenly blurred into motion around him was that even the team's dog was a superior ninja to him. This was going to be even more troublesome than he'd expected. Otafukagai was loud and annoyingly bright, Shikamaru thought as he followed his 2 Jonin teammates into the city at a sedate pace. Pakken was sniffing left and right, having far more trouble tracking Minato's trail through the packed streets, regularly losing even the slightest hint and just wandering for a time until he picked it back up. Shikamaru had much time to think as he followed the team leader at a short distance. They hadn't really spoken, not since he was originally offered this position, and he couldn't help but wonder about the man. He'd quickly concluded that his original postulate, that it was some family member of the Fourth's rather than the real one, was untenable, back in the room where he'd first taken off his mask. Kakashi was far too friendly with the man for it to be merely an obscure Namikaze relative, as well. He rejected several hypotheses without much thought after that. The concept of the Fourth secretly being alive all along didn't match up with the fact that the man didn't seem to have aged a day, nor would it explain curious lacunas of knowledge about recent events. The idea of Minato as an imposter seemed similarly difficult to believe, as the man clearly had intimate knowledge of techniques that only the Fourth had known, including his signature teleportation jutsu. Finally, Shikamaru had concluded that the best explanation was also the strangest. The Fourth had been resurrected. Kakashi didn't seem to share Shikamaru's worry about a long-dead Hokage just popping to life again. That man didn't seem bothered at all. The young Nara supposed that their close relationship in life might have simply translated over now that they had reunited. I remember this, Minato suddenly stated, pointing at a store to his right. Let's look here. The shop they entered was unassuming. Shikamaru cast a doubtful glance at various bottles of alleged medicines and vast collections of useless trinkets. Behind the counter stood a pudgy elderly civilian with a gaudy sombrero perched precariously on his head. Excuse me, sir, Minato asked politely, attracting the man's attention. Shikamaru looked on in interest as his team leader fidgeted nervously. Do you recall any confused shinobi passing by here? About 2 weeks ago? Sort of longish hair? Ah! The civilian exclaimed with wide eyes. Of course. Strange one, that was. He looked familiar, but I never got his name. If you're looking for him, he's left town ages ago, I think. Minato murmured. Did he tell you anything about what he was doing? Just that he was wounded, nothing else. He was heading for a shinobi village, if I recall. I gave him a map of the Land of Fire. The civilian shrugged. That's all. Not many shinobi pass by here, so he stood out. Minato thanked him and backed out, followed quickly by Shikamaru. Kakashi was snacking on some onigiri, though how he managed it despite his mask was anyone's guess. Since this is definitely where I went last time, we can hypothesize that the nearest edge of town is probably where I came in. Minato turned to Pakken. Can you detect anything that far away? Your sense spotty at best here. I'll probably be able to pick it back up just outside the city limits, the dog said grudgingly. There are too many piss-drunk people around here. The scent, it turned out, was strong and clear right outside the city gates. Not very many people used the eastern gate evidently, as it was poorly maintained and there was little to no road that led from it except around the city towards the other entrances. The path the three followed from there, tracking Minato's scent, wound between hills and little valleys. It quickly became apparent that the distances between particularly strong concentrations, likely a resting spot, were becoming shorter. End of the line, folks. Packen noted finally as he sprinted ahead towards a small stream that crossed the land, edged by a small pack of trees and neatly entrenched in a valley that obstructed it from view. He sat down on one of several large rocks that dotted the landscape. Here's where some scents split up. Yours ends here, Anbu-san. Shikamaru gazed around the little clearing. There was evidence of what appeared to be a scuffle, broken twigs, squashed grass, quite a few depressions that were reminiscent of body imprints. Though there was no sign of any weapons, the air itself felt charged with chakra, and that after nearly 2 weeks. A scarily powerful jutsu had been at work here. Hanging from one of the trees was a long strip of mostly white cloth, seemingly half devoured by moths, reddish flames at the bottom where the strip was thinnest. That was undoubtedly from the fourth's cloak. Which scents are there other than mine? Minato said as he briefly took the decaying strip into his hand before letting it drop. Packen grumbled, sniffing deeply. Yours is strongest, more recent by at least a day compared to the rest. There's 2 heading back the way we came, though their path goes southwards and around town. Packen froze, turning to Kakashi. Same sense as the ones I smelled back on the other side. Not a coincidence, I take it? Kakashi conjectured as he cautiously scanned for threats, though he suspected there were none. Identities? One's still familiar, but Packen said hesitatingly. It has some of the same qualities as the one we've been following, though I can't know for certain if that means anything. Shikamaru suddenly realized what that likely meant. There was one obvious person that would have a scent like Minato's, and would likely be known to a Konoha Niken. Give the boy's tendency to be seemingly everywhere in Konoha at once when pranks went off, the dogs probably picked up on it there. Naruto. Kakashi and Minato turned to him with intense looks and he gulped. I bet the scent is Naruto's. Whatever happened must not have transpired near Konoha, it occurred here. The reason it took days to find him has to be that he wasn't there since the beginning. Ah, yes. Packen answered suddenly, raising his paw. I recall now, you asked me to track him for you once or twice, when you were still with the awful tattoo people. I think the pineapple boy is right. When you say tattoo people, you mean the AMBU. Kakashi pointed out in exasperation. You know I wouldn't have let them put a tattoo on you. Packen didn't answer, sniffing deeply, whether in disgust or to actually smell wasn't clear. Shikamaru was blinking at being called, of all things, pineapple boy. Naruto was here then, and the other scent must be whoever was taking him back towards Konoha for us to find. Kakashi observed tiredly, looking at his teacher apologetically. The person that did this didn't expect to be tracked out of the direct area of Konoha itself, didn't start hiding their scent until much closer to the village. Probably didn't figure we'd find anything before this place was washed clean. Alternatively, he or she wasn't very powerful and had to conserve chakra. If they weren't careful about cleaning up their tracks, that probably means these people didn't know about me, Minato pointed out. Let's face it, if they're going to go out of their way to hide this location from Konoha, they'd hardly let a person just waltz out of here and into said village. Much less me. Why here? Shikamaru wondered aloud as he took in the unremarkable clearing. It's far from town, sure, but then, most places are pretty remote when you get into the wilds. There are no crazy ritual tables or whatever you might need for Jinchuriki business, as far as I understand it. Is it just a coincidence? Minato winced, taking a look around himself, fidgeting with his mask slightly though deciding to keep it on. There must be some clue around here. If they were good enough to take someone from Konoha without notice, they had the ability to do worse. I'm picking up a faint scent heading north by northwest, reported Packen dutifully. It left about the same time as the other one. The little dog scratched himself behind the ear nervously. Can't tell who it is, but it's definitely strong. It's been almost entirely erased with some type of chakra diffusion. That's a Jonin level skill, at least, Kakashi said worriedly. Most Jonin use chakra conserving methods of hiding their steps. This person must be pretty strong if they can throw out energy like that. It's strange, Packen said with another sniff. I'm sensing far more of you than I should, Mask-sama. It's almost like the little dog immediately ran over to the thickly packed trees and shrubs across the little gulch with a strange expression, ignoring Kakashi's questioning look. Was that your dog's way of saying I should take a bath? Minato pondered as he looked in contemplation towards the northwest, one of the 2 easy ways to get into this little valley, cut out neatly by the stream. It could be a coincidence, but that way was straight towards the land of Earth, and IWA. You'd better come see this. Packen yelled suddenly from a little distance away, his voice strangely high-pitched. Minato and Kakashi were there first, and Shikamaru noted the latter paling as he stepped back in undisguised shock. The genin didn't need to wonder long before he realized the reason for that reaction. As he stared at the object Packen had uncovered, he glanced nervously at his team leader, who seemed to radiate a mix of terror and confusion. The man ripped off his mask and stared down wild-eyed. Covered almost entirely by shrubs and trees was a long black shape, inscribed with numerous seals on the sides and bottom, about 2 meters in length and slanted on its side. It was a coffin. Next to it, covered in seals in much the same way, was the lid, inscribed with Yan or the number 4 in clear script. Within the coffin was the dead and preserved body of the 4th Hokage, Namikaze Minato. "Choza, are you in?" "Right here, coming," Choza Akimichi responded from his kitchen as he stumbled into the hall, a large bread in his fist that was only partially devoured. "Why do you have to come visit in the middle of dinner, Shikaku?" Naro Shikaku rolled his eyes, holding out a closed scroll. "It's always dinner time for you, Choza. I'm here to deliver some new orders. I'm sure you agree that those are more urgent." The Hokage's pulling the old trio back together for a time. "What?" Choza sat down blinking. Why would he do that now of all times? An official team again? It's been peaceful for years, and we've all got proper jobs. You're Jonin commander, for crying out loud. Choza, you're a 15th generation Akimichi, act like it. Shikaku smirked, tossing the scroll to his old teammate. Inoichi's coming too. Anbuyu's tracking a couple of spies that have slipped in. We're to be the muscle to back them up if any one of them finds the enemy. I could really use that brawn of yours in solving this. Fine. I'll go tell Choji that I'll be late then. Choza sighed and quickly ate the rest of his dinner. Be right there. I heard, Dad. Choji's reply sounded bored as he looked around the corner and waved at Shikaku. Yo, Shikamaru's dad. Shikaku greeted him back and was surprised to hear Yamanaka Ino's voice as well. Where the heck is Shikamaru anyway? I haven't seen him in days, ever since that transfer. He's out of town for a time, Shikaku answered, walking around the corner to find Choji and Ino sharing a table decked with all sorts of delicacies. He's on a mission. Ah, man. Choji muttered. Shika's already got a C-class? We still have team building missions, with that new creep. It's horrible. Shikaku saw no need to inform them that their former teammate went way beyond C rank. Size not that bad, Ino responded lightly to Choji's shudders, as she took a sip from her drink. You just have to get used to him, I suppose. You only say that because he thinks you're pretty, Choji retorted dryly. I don't think anyone should have introduced that boy to a book on nicknames. Shikaku sighed softly, the troublesome unspoken but clear, leaving quickly as Choza followed. It was some distance to their destination, fetching the last of the traditional Ino-Shikacho combination. The two hadn't made it to the Yamanaka home yet, when Choza spotted something peculiar. There, in the middle of the road, glinting softly in the moonlight, was a Hittite. An IWA Hittite. It was scratched up and smudged, but it couldn't have been here for very long, at least, or it would have been picked up by Anbu. As Choza bent over to pick it up, he was late in noticing that a nigh intangible chakra thread was attached to the edge, trembling slightly. Shikaku yelled something. The Akimichi didn't quite hear it. Before he could do anything, the thread snapped taut, ripping away from the fallen forehead protector while dozens of paper tags escaped from under the cloth. Explosive seal tags. Crap. The explosion broke all the glasses and windows in 3 neighborhoods surrounding the blast.